Hello and welcome to Six Part. Today I'm gonna continue the story What If Deku Had a Solo Leveling Quirk Part 3. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a big thumbs up, and to watch more videos like this, subscribe to my channel and turn that bell notification on so you never miss an upload. Now wasting no more time, let's begin.
Perks are the symbol of the people you have developed a strong relationship with, according to a true gamer. Although not every relationship will lead to a benefit, friendships in general will have greater advantages. Perks are a presentation of unique characteristics that define a non-gamer. Make friends and cultivate relationships. A sticky note: a girl I once met gave me a perk that improved my performance in bed. Gaining her friendship gave you a benefit known as Lust of Aphrodite, but the sweet little thing could talk endlessly about flowers. So how was America? After returning from his vacation, Aki had stopped by. Pretty good. New York was fun, and we took a bus drive down to Florida to visit the amusement parks. His personality was at zero. Cheater. With a smile, she said, "It's not cheating if I'm better than you. It is if you have the move list up on your HUD." "I have no idea what you mean," she said, her smile wavering. "Say told me a while back to not play with you. There's no need to try and lie." She looked down at him and whispered, "Traitor. So what are you going to do before school?" she asked. "No idea. Getting my last 2 levels would be nice. Why not go to the Shadowscape?" They began a second match. It took me nearly 3 weeks there to gain levels 17 and 18. There's no way I'm going to spend over a month and a half there, alone, to gain 2 levels. He was nudged by her. "Ah, you want a battle buddy?" Laughing, he said, "I guess. Well, I'm sorry I can't go with you. Dad's grounded me from leaving this plane of existence for the foreseeable future." He dismissed the apology with a wave, saying, "I know, it's fine. Why not invite someone else?" she asked, winning again. "Like?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. She sang, "Would any of the pussycats join you?" "What about Pixie?" "Probably not. Her quirk wouldn't work there, and Mandalays wouldn't be helpful against something like the Knight. Tiger probably would, but I can't take one of them away from each other, and Ragdoll isn't a frontline fighter." He took a moment to alter the game. "They also have hero duties to keep up on. I can't ask any of them to stop to help me like that." After nodding and apparently giving it some thought, she said, "You need more friends." His glare was half-hearted. "No really, think about it. You have me, say, the Pussycats, and All Might. What other friends do you have?" Saying, "I guess you're right. It's not like I can walk up to someone and just say, 'Want to be my friend?'" He sighed and reclined on his floor. "You could," she chuckled, "but that'd be evil." "What do you normally do when Say goes off on her own?" "Usually, Mom was with me, but when she was with Say, I would just play around with spells," she said, hanging her head and arms off the side of his bed. "You're in the same boat as me then." "Nope, I have friends at school and I know a couple of Mom's friends," she smiled at him. Cat had friends. "Hey, I hate that. I thought you were renovating." "I'm making an effort, but this place is covered in cobwebs." "Rude, jerk." With a laugh, Aki said, "I wish I could hear the other side. The world isn't prepared for that. I consider myself to be a pretty person. Too bad you're just a voice in my head. If you keep doing this, I can be a pain in your head." It was a promise rather than a threat. He glanced at Aki and said, "Okay, return to your renovations." "Who was Cat friends with?" he asked. She gazed thoughtfully at the floor. "Well, in Japan there's the bunny lady, cat lady, and the thieves." "Thieves?" Izuku asked as she stopped. Aki replied, "Mom wasn't a hero, and she didn't care about any villain unless they took a life or harmed people. So thieves were exempt from her punishment." She utilized air quotes. "Why did you say it like that?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. Mom's form of punishment was a swift death if they took a life, and a slow painful one if they harmed people. "Did she ever kill anyone that didn't deserve it?" She nodded. "Mom absorbed their memories and used those as proof. The law didn't like it, but they never tried super hard to catch her. She did take quite a few murderers off the streets." Izuku gazed thoughtfully at the ceiling. "Hey now, I'm going to need payment if you're going to get philosophical. Do you believe we're acting appropriately? Many people could be saved by us out there." After a moment of reflection, she said, "I think Catherine knew what you'd become long before you knew what a hero was." "Okay, I guess we'll talk," she sighed. "She probably wanted you to grow up to be more than All Might, a hero." People see more than just a hero when they see him. A symbol is visible to them. I believe she had the same intention for you. He remained silent. Do you want to learn any skills? Aki asked, breaking the silence. Sure. What did you have in mind? He asked, looking up at her. You wanted to learn how to engrave runes, right? She asked, bouncing up and down. Really? He asked, returning to his seated position. She smiled and said, I probably won't get much of a chance to see you once school starts, so might as well teach it now. Awesome, how do we start? He said with a smile. With a sly smile, she produced 2 blades. She tossed him one and said, watch. We start with this. He caught it and glanced at her. She began slicing into her forearm's flesh with her own knife. Make sure you don't fidget or cause any unnecessary lines. Any obstructions will cause the runes to fail, disastrously. She had cut an X through a nearly perfect circle. The tattoo emitted a multicolored hue that faded before completely vanishing. Now once the rune is drawn, you pump mana into it. This one will make me slightly invisible, but not enough for me to disappear entirely. Aki was now open and honest. Basic runes will disappear once used and are not able to be used again until the timer ends. The timer never goes down with level up. How many runes are there? How many spells are there? She asked with a smile. Seriously, his wide-eyed gaze asked. She pointed to her arm and said, this rune was extremely weak and took 3 seconds to activate. It also didn't even make me invisible. She nodded and continued, runes are nearly infinite, but the amount of mana and time to activate are ridiculous. Her transparency came to an end as she completed that. I know 2 spells that would render me completely invisible and impossible to detect. What use is that rune compared to the spell? She responded immediately, none. The spell is instant and produces no light. The only upside of the rune is that it only required 1/4 of the mana and didn't consume any more than that. He asked, then what's the point of learning runes? With an eyebrow raise. Watch. She smiled at him and used the knife to carve 3 intricate runes into her skin. After completing the first, she went on to the second, explaining that, this one will teleport me 2 meters from wherever I am. Now I need a way to power that rune instead of me using mana. This one will store the mana and make the first rune nearly instantaneous. The first rune was significantly simpler than the second. The third is the condition rune, its only function is to detect whatever I want it to. The second and third runes were charged by her. Now, hit me. He said, looking at him. He got to his feet and swung at her shoulder. She vanished and then reappeared sitting on the edge of his desk before he could make contact. Runes like those are able to be used in case of emergencies or even traps. In terms of offense they aren't too useful compared to spells, but they do have their benefits. That's awesome. It's like coding, he exclaimed as he saw stars. She said with a nod, exactly. Nevertheless, that compelled the inquiry, why doesn't Say use them, and did your mom? Jumping off his desk, she said, Mom had her own contingency plans and Say can't do it. What do you mean? He asked, tilting his head. 2 things, first she hates the sight of her own blood, second is that her affinity for it is 1. Isn't she willing to blow up her own arm to win? With a wave, Aki dismissed his inquiry, saying, adrenaline makes you forget fear. Oh, a moment's silence, what was your mom's version of this? She turned to point to the nape of her neck and said, you know about classes, right? He nodded, and she went on, well, her class was spellsword. Each class gives its own benefits and one of the spellswords is contingency spells. It allows the caster to cast spells that delay their cast until parameters are met. She vanished after saying, if someone were to get within an inch of this spot. He turned and saw her with daggers in her hands, saying, she'd teleport behind them ready to attack. Each had a distinct color crackle. That's awesome. What was that spell? How is your class chosen? Could I get that? With a shrug, Akito brought out the daggers and said, I'll give it to you before I leave. No idea. Say and Mom refused to tell me anything or give any hints. Lame. She didn't share much with you, did she? Aki grinned. Nope. She said she wanted us to experience life to the fullest. That's why she never cared if Say and I went off on our own. Wait, so you could just disappear and she'd be fine with that? Laughed. Not really. If we were gone longer than half a day, we'd be teleported back to the house. Then we get yelled at and grounded. Aki smiled at him, which was sufficient response to the question, wait, she cast contingency spells on you, didn't she? So any other questions before you try? After giving it some thought, he did ask, Can these be used to defend against quirks? They can be used against spells though, she said, shaking her head. I had mom try against me. Really? How? Can they be overpowered? He asked, raising an eyebrow. With the level your spells are at, no. Your spells aren't strong enough to counteract my engraving skill. What's your engraving level? She blushed a little and said, 74. He said, 74. How? Sei said her highest skill was 53. His eyes widened. She raised her arms. I practice when I'm bored. I'd show you my rune algorithm, but I don't feel like taking off my shirt. As his cheeks began to flush, he said, please don't. She laughed. Now let's get you started. We don't have long before I have to get back home. New ability. Level of engraving. 1. Burn, slice, and scratch. You possess a talent that predates even the existence of the gods on earth. Develop this ability to honor your ancient forefathers. List of known runes, max rank. R. Change in color. Change in color. What's the easiest way to level this up? Cutting the runes into yourself and using them. She said, spinning the knife in her hand. Rinse and repeat until you become lost in your work. At least I have something to do before school. She chuckled. I probably wouldn't let your mom see, she might think you have an issue. With a smile, he said, more than likely. See you later, Izuku. She waved as she opened a portal. Night. He waved in return. She passed through, and the portal closed. Izuku used observe after glancing at the knife. Knife for carving. Quality A. This knife will never need to be sharpened because it is indestructible. This knife's inability to be used on another person is its sole disadvantage. Wow, it's truly excellent. Where did she get it? Probably her mother. After a brief pause, his mother exclaimed, Izuku. Lunch is ready. He glanced at his desk clock. 11. Damn time zones, he sighed. As he stood up to go, a second, smaller portal opened. Given the rainbow bracelet, Aki's hand was the one that protruded. He grasped her hand. I got a new spell. Mana daggers, see below. She withdrew her hand as the spell was granted, and the portal shut. This is really awesome. Do you believe it can withstand Bone Blade? We'll have to try it later. For now though, lunch with mom. The first day of classes. Izuku, it's time. He picked up his jacket and backpack. This stuff is really strange. He kissed his mother's cheek and rolled his eyes. Bye mom, I'll be home later. Have a good day. He started walking down the street and out the door to the train station. Can you tell me who made it? Are you still talking about that? Indeed, we can't destroy it, which irritates me. Calm down you toddler, you're so destructive. I'll give you a headache all day if you call me a toddler again. I like it though, makes me less worried I'll destroy it if a fight breaks out, he said, ignoring her. Try shocking it. All right. He made her laugh and used a weak mana storm. After dispersing the electricity, the material settled back onto his arm. Thus, it is unaffected by fire, electricity, or sharp objects. We'll try other things when they present themselves, I suppose. If we used one for all, I bet it would be shredded. Can we? Not the location or the time. We'll try it out after school, I swear. K. She began playing music for the remainder of the ride to school after they had been walking in silence for a minute. His train was more crowded than ever, and the train station was even busier. While he did see some students wearing UA attire, the majority wore their own. All of the students started their ascent as the train came to a stop at the foot of the hill. Ahead of him he saw a familiar set of red hair. He ran ahead, caught up to her through the crowd of students. Kendo. Midoriya, you made it in. She grinned as she turned to face him. He grinned and said, because of the 4 extra categories. She gave a smile. They made my performance seem better than I thought it was. He laughed. I managed to take down Pixie with a little help. She sang, 2 pros in 1 day. You might be a bit overqualified. I might have to put in a complaint. With a smile, he said, let's see how that goes for you. I guess I'll have to go to the principal, she said, matching his smile. You do that. They talked the entire way as they walked to school. They swapped shoes before making their way to class. He and Kendo were in class 1A, and based on what he could see in front of him, Uraraka, the girl, was also there. Hey Uraraka. When he called, the girl jumped, but she turned and grinned, saying, you made it. He smiled and nodded, saying, so did you. Only because you allowed me to capture that woman, she said, nervously scratching her arm. You really let someone else capture a pro instead of you? Kendo asked, raising an eyebrow. I gave you one, didn't I? He smiled at her. Gave. You threw her at me. He waved her accusation away, saying, details. Wait, another. You captured too? Asked Uraraka, his eyes wide. Izuku pushed Kendo and grinned, saying, nope. You got one and she did. While speaking to the other girl, she slammed him against the wall. Don't listen to him, he's a smart ass. My name is Kendo. Uraraka. She smiled, nice to meet you. He got up and went to the door. You two ready? He asked, and both girls nodded. When he opened the door, a very familiar face said, Kachin. You're laying it on thick, aren't you? Snorted Cat. Bakugo turned red, and he grinned. Nerd, I told you not to call me that. We aren't kids anymore. Glad to see you again too. They all three went inside and took a seat. His seat was directly behind his childhood friend and new rival. How many villain points did you get? He replied without looking back, 163. Sincerely impressed, he said, Commanders. 1. He put up a major fight. I was out of commission for a few days after the fight. Who? He sighed, some guy named Tiger. He wasn't fighting at 100%, I could sense it. Probably. Tiger is able to shrink his body and extend it a ridiculously long distance. If he was just fighting in melee with you, he was going easy. Thought so. No pro should be that pathetic, he complained. A recognizable sleeping bag in the shape of a caterpillar emerged as the door opened. Everyone quiet down. Aizawa tossed the sleeping bag over his shoulder after unzipping it. He pulled out a box and opened it, saying, we're skipping orientation. Take an appropriate outfit, and follow me. As direct as ever, at least he adds interest to everything. After grabbing an appropriate outfit, each student followed their teacher outside. They were instructed to change after being shown to the locker rooms. Izuku grinned as he had Cat read every statistic page to his classmates. This year will be enjoyable, probably from your recollections of past years. Aizawa changed and led them to a brand new arena that he had never seen before. There was no rhyme or reason to the buildings and pipes that littered the cityscape. Izuku could only make out the bottom, obscured by the shadows of the surrounding structures. Every student gave him a perplexed look when he said, today we'll be playing a game. Class 1B will be joining us, and we'll be playing a game of capture the flag. He waited for everyone to settle down to clarify, your objective is to capture a flag hidden somewhere in this area. You must both attack theirs and defend your own flag. Any use of violent force will be punished harshly. We are playing a game, not sparring. You have 5 minutes to plan. A brand new quest. Take the flag. Goal. Class 1A needs to win the match. Reward. Bonus goal. 2 students, Iida and Yaoyorozu, had to calm everyone down after they began yelling over one another. Iida began to chop the air, saying, we need to form a plan. Weird habit. A floating set of clothes started bouncing. I can probably sneak up on them. How would she? Is that a question at all? Oh, Yaoyorozu nodded. That's a start, but who wants to be on defense? Several students raised their hands, including Kendo and Uraraka. I'm assuming everyone else is okay with being an attacker. No complaints were made. Then split off into groups and make up plans. Cat spoke up, we could probably do this alone. Probably. We have no idea who is in Class B though. Or even where the flag is. Look for a large group of auras. Let's see what their plan is first. If it's something you agree that would at least be fun, then let's go with them. He joined the group of designated attackers. Kugo is it? A grunt. Is that all right with you? He gave a nod. Whatever. It looks like they already have a plan. Let's go out on our own then. He shrugged. Sure. We can watch and help where we can. He sat down on a bench and just relaxed until it started. Aizawa spoke to the whole group after 4 or so minutes went by. Go find somewhere to hide your flag. Both groups went and looked around. While he couldn't say this wouldn't be fun, it was rather. What's the word? Mundane. After a second of though, he gave a mental nod, that works. It's because we're used to fighting monsters who never give up until you or it are dead. We're best friends with a girl, who can command spells like they're a toy. We pissed off a goddess almost casually. We are above such petty games. Is that really what I think? No, that's what I think. You think it would be more fun against pros? He started laughing. That does sound like a ton of fun actually. Aizawa walked over to him unseen and spoke to him. You look insane when you talk to the voice in your head. Izuku smiled. You should hear our conversations. Aizawa nodded. Are you going to join? Izuku shrugged. You and I both know, I could win in almost an instant. He nodded again. You probably could, so why not make it harder? Sleepy say what? Izuku raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Aizawa shrugged. Why not put more rules on yourself? Like no spells or quirks. Bonus objective discovered. Complete the quest without a single spell or quirk usage. Izuku thought out loud. All skill run. That would actually be fun. Putting our skills to the test in nothing but hand-to-hand combat and stealth skills. I'm in. Izuku smiled. That actually sounds fun. Go join them then. Izuku jumped off the observation balcony toward his class. Start was called 2 minutes ago, and he could hear the fights going on all around him. He was currently hiding in the shadows and doing everything he could do to not be seen. You smell that? He nodded. 2 people. Boy and girl. Maybe we're going to find something fun. It's literally the first day of school. Doesn't mean a couple didn't make it through together. He had to admit it was a possibility. Straight ahead, on the ground. He looked at the floor ahead of him. Small mushrooms were sitting around, releasing some sort of spore into the air. Paralytic, possibly. Better be on the safe side. He held his breath as they walked through, carefully stepping over and in between the gaps. As they went deeper, the mushrooms were getting thicker and more densely packed. Luckily, the pipes overhead didn't seem to be affected, so he climbed as quietly as possible. Past him made this easy. His sneak was decently leveled. As he pulled himself up over the edge, and was greeted by 2 students. He hung off the edge and used Observe on both. Cat read the information out loud for him. Bondo Kojira, level 18. Quirksman Dean, rank D. Physically he's bulky, not very fast. His mental stats are average. His charisma is low. Warning message says he's a gentle giant, but willing to fight. Kanoko Komori, level 17. Quirk mushrooms, rank C. She's not very strong, fast, or able to take a hit. Her int and wis are higher than ours, her cha is low. Warning says, the knowledge of the devoted can be the weapon of a hero. Alright, that explains the mushrooms. No clue about the guy's quirk. Let's sneak under them. He lowered himself and hung off the bottom. Luckily your climb allows for this. As he slowly made his way across, he asked, do you think we should skill grind again? We could, but what skills? Sneak highlighted a loose pipe he was about to grab. I'm thinking, our stealth skills in combat. That seems fine. After a pause she spoke again, do you hear that? He stopped mid-grab, and just hung there as he listened. Our classmates are keeping them back. Maybe. Izuku did notice the sounds of fighting were getting more distant. He looked toward where they were standing, and noticed they were on a floor of pipes, with thousands of mushrooms below them. He couldn't see the flag down below him, but that didn't mean it wasn't down there. Hey, Shiozaki. Izuku couldn't make out the reply. You still good? He couldn't hear anything. Izuku continued his crawl and went toward the edge of the platform. Peeking over, Class 1B students were spread around a large mushroom. He could barely make out the flag inside. That's one way to stop a stealth user from stealing it, he said with a sly smile. Have a thought, perhaps, but we'll require a diversion. His thoughts bubbled up with her excitement. This is a good idea. While most of his students were under Aizawa's supervision, a few were either completely absent or not doing anything at the moment. Shortly after the timer began, Hagakure had undressed and vanished. It was impossible to spot her on any of the cameras, and Midoriya had vanished a short while later. He had to admit that neither appeared to have attempted to grab the flag yet. Both were exhibiting remarkable restraint. It was going strangely well, the defense of the flag of his own class. They had asked Toshido to use a slippery slime to cover every entry point. Although she was able to fulfill their request, she was currently complaining about a drink on the floor. Every other student of his was on guard. As Vlad watched the fight between their classes, he said, "You have decent fighters this year. Todoroki is quite the powerhouse. The Bakugo kid seems like he'll be a handful as well." After giving a nod, Aizawa looked back at the screen. Ms. Tokage is a competent fighter along with the both of the transfer students. Mr. Monoma's quirk could be a liability if he doesn't get his personality under control. He seems to think there's a difference between A and B. He started it shortly after walking into class. Vlad sighed and exhaled. Aizawa simply nodded and rolled up another camera over Class B's designated defense spot. He was awaiting the appearance of one of his students. It must have occurred to Vlad that, camera 17. He's underneath the platform. He turned on the camera. Izuku was scratching something into a pipe while dangling upside down. Any idea what he's doing? He sighed, hoping inwardly that Hagakure wouldn't be caught in the act. The kid has too many tricks up his sleeve. We'll just have to wait and see. He didn't think Midoriya could see her without some kind of spell. Well, I suppose this is it. She needed to be as quiet as she could. She was invisible due to her quirk, but any noise she made was just typical. She began to search for the flag, slinking along the edge and out of sight of the main crowd. Even her class was full of strange people, but so was Class B. She was attracted to some of the guys, but appearances aren't everything. She was more than happy to put off dating until she had a better understanding of the person. After all, it was just the first day of classes. In the center was a big mushroom that appeared to be significant. She approached it cautiously, knelt down, and peered beneath the top. A small sliver of red cloth protruded from its stem. What will I do to remove it? In search of inspiration, she had to suppress a startled yelp when a shadowy figure materialized from behind her. They took action after one of the Class B students began shouting instructions. She saw the spectacle-wearing, hairy one charge it and turn into a beast. During his charge, he reached the shadow and flew through it. After a few moments of bewilderment, she saw a number of additional colored shadows emerge. A knife slid over to her feet as she was looking side to side as the students began to panic. She saw one of her classmates when she turned to see where it had come from. Did it not happen, Midoriya? He winked at her before lowering himself back beneath the platform. How did he perceive me? She picked up the knife and put the question away for later. Although she had no knowledge of weapons, it was very attractive. When she sliced open the mushroom, a spore of some kind escaped, forcing her to hold her breath. A second later, just as she was ready to pick it up, the flag emerged. They'll see the flag, she thought, and her only thought was to hand it to Midoriya. She jumped and turned to see the hairy one sniffing the air. Hey, she said, I smell someone. They're not from our class. She grabbed the flag and ran for the edge, not wanting to take the chance. When she saw the hole plunge into darkness, she nearly screamed. An arm caught her beneath her chest before she fell too far. She sighed and remained motionless. A whispered request, crawl onto my back and hold on. I need both hands to climb. She turned to face him after clumsily shifting in his grasp. He had a very pink face. Give me a second. Nice. You gotta feel. It happened by accident. I am unable to locate her parts. All I can smell is her. Hagakure encircled his waist and back with her arms and legs. Her breath tickled his ear as she whispered, I'm good to go. Way too close. I like it. I might grow accustomed to this. We must find a girlfriend for you. I have no idea how. Stop talking. I'm attempting to focus. Okay, she said, blowing a raspberry. His cheeks felt like they were burning. His energy was being depleted by crawling around upside down and carrying a girl on his back. He needed to hurry, but not so much that he was in danger of falling. She whispered in his ear, very softly, did you crawl like this the whole way? Yes, we do require a girlfriend. He nodded in response, ignoring her. You must be super strong. The runes must have lost their mana, causing the commotion above them to briefly die before shouts took its place. The flag is gone. Find it. Hurry. Since they had no other option, Izuku continued to crawl. Additionally, he had just realized that the mushrooms weren't paralyzing. I'm relieved about that. They returned to the spot where he had initially leapt up there after about 10 minutes. He knelt down and helped the girl stand again. Which way back to base? Pointing to the base, he raised a finger to his lips. The flag dipped slightly, and he assumed she nodded. He whispered as softly as he could, I'll walk with you back, but if we get caught, just run. They began to walk back as the flag dipped once more. A couple of times he had to drag her into some hiding places. As the defense team launched an offensive, Class B was creating a commotion. Throughout the game, his sneak leveled multiple times, and he was pleased to report that it was well worth it. I improved my skill level. Sneak levels. 22 to 26. Chance of hide increase. 26%. The cost of stamina is 3.7 per second. I found the smell. Izuku cursed out loud. He shouted, run, and shoved Hagakure. He pivoted and raised his fists. 3 people made up the group that had located them. He made rapid use of observe. Quirk. Beast. Poltergeist is a quirk, she read in a single breath. Thought. Quirk. Smandine. He avoided the blob of gunk that was thrown at him and confronted the massive beast directly. Using his forearm, he deflected the paw's swipe. He attempted a punch to the stomach using Knight's Burst style, but it was unsuccessful. To escape the blow, the man had cancelled his quirk. Izuku was left out in the open and sustained some minor injuries after being struck by a piece of pipe. Accepting the blow, he tugged on the pipe, causing it to tear from the force acting on it. He made the decision to flaunt himself a little by spinning it around. The beast roared back at him after the one with the holes in his head threw out more of the gunk. He sidestepped, avoiding the sheet metal and gunk that were hurled at him. The beast had attempted to bull rush him, but it was caught off guard by something incredibly foolish. Izuku charged open-handed at the gunk guy after throwing the pipe at him. He activated the runes on his shoulders, trusting them. Rune. Weak strength rune. Position. Q. Effect. Increase STR by 5% for 1 second. Special. This rune is reusable, but each time it is used, the duration for all of the same runes is cut in half. Price. 50 mana, 24-hour cooldown period. He flipped the beast and slammed him into the ground using his enhanced STR and judo style. The man's transformation came to an end, and he was left gasping for air. Izuku obviously missed Bondo because he was struck by a huge blob of the gunk, which solidified almost instantly. At least Hagakure got away, he sighed. The Class B students had awakened their friend by adding more gunk to his neck. With a start, Shishida had awoken and adjusted his glasses. He sighed as he looked up and saw Izuku covered in glue. I admit, you gave me a surprise. I didn't expect you would turn out to be that strong. He stood up straight again and said, my name is Shishida. He pointed to his classmates and said, this is Ms. Yanagi. She avoided his stare. He waved and said, and this is Mr. Bondo. Nice to meet you all. You can call me Midoriya, Izuku said with a smile. I don't expect this to work, but would you mind telling me where the female is? Sorry, can't do that. There's at least one classmate that would have my head if I did that, Izuku said, shaking his head as best he could. Shishida sighed and turned to face his classmates after nodding. I expected as much. He turned back to Izuku and said, looks like the game is over. You may release him, Mr. Bondo. Let's head to the observation deck. You may join us if you like. He nodded and grinned. That'd be great. The quest is finished. Bonus goal accomplished. Rewards. 2000 XP and 1 skill coin. A horn sounded along the way. He pushed the coin into his pocket as soon as it appeared. They were used to level a skill once, and he had previously received one. They joined the rest of their classmates and carried on with their stroll. An invisible girl in clothes immediately tackled him. We did it. Glad you made it. Any trouble? He said, laughing. Nope. The rest of the guys protected me as I ran. As he glanced over, he noticed that a number of his classmates had scrapes and burns. Hiroshima was the most disorganized. She was bruised and beaten all over. It appears that we missed the enjoyment. I thought you had fun with that. You're right, was said after a brief pause. We might be lucky if we asked the gravity girl out. He moaned in his head. They were permitted to take a shower after their game and then went back to class. Ectoplasm entered the classroom where they were seated. Kat described him as an imposing figure that never wavered. His mug could give a criminal nightmares. He was dressed like a typical hero, complete with cloak. My name, as some of you may know, is Ectoplasm. I will be teaching mathematics for you this year and I expect the best out of all of you. He explained the coursework that was expected of them this year for the remainder of the brief visit. Izuku was jotting down everything so that he could work through the work in advance. Probably exhausted from the game, a few of the students were beginning to fall asleep. So, question, yes, what would happen if we finished all of the coursework for the year? I don't know, she hummed. Ectoplasm gathered his belongings and left, saying, with that I will be seeing you all tomorrow. Have a good day today. Some of the students were whispering to him, just introducing themselves and talking about their summers. Izuku closed his eyes and re-enjoyed the experience of sitting in a classroom. Being with people his own age was an odd sensation in and of itself, and he hadn't been in one for a while. Another teacher walked as the class fell silent. He copied the expected material for the year and waited for the visit to end. Hello. You may call me Mr. Ishiyama. I will be in charge of your literature class. I expect everyone to work hard and to pass with flying colors. This is dull. Today is the first day. And it will be like this every day after we have learned everything during the week. After giving it some thought, he said, fair point. Perhaps we shouldn't level the skills for them then. Why would we act in that way? Make school a little less dull, I suppose. In that case, we would truly need to pay attention. It's true that he had a shorter attention span after acquiring Gamer. He has a lot of skills to level up and his HUD is always visible. When it came to sitting and listening, he had no chance. He had to be doing the work, really. He wasn't even certain that merely listening improved his abilities. But he didn't think so. How about we complete the coursework for the semester and then do some additional work? The teachers don't seem to be complaining about us keeping ourselves occupied. It sounds good, Kat said as he began to play music in his mind. Do as you please, I'll be present. He tried to concentrate for a few minutes, but it didn't help. It was really difficult not to sing along to some of the older songs she was playing that he enjoyed. Bakugo was unable to claim to be enjoying himself. On the contrary, the classes appeared to be easy, and only a small number of students appeared capable of resisting. However, it looked like it would be more intriguing this year. The nerd appeared to be much stronger than in their previous fight, and he would be able to use his quirk as much as he wanted during heroics. Nerd, Kachin. Izuku turned, startled. Don't call me that, he said, putting his backpack aside and assessing Izuku. He appeared prepared to fight, having put on muscle. Good. Fight me. Izuku appeared to have regained his composure and refused to back down. Why? He could hear the poison in his own voice as he said, prove yourself to me. Fine. When and where? Right there. He felt his arms twitching to attack and his blood boiling. However, even he was aware that attacking someone in the street was not a good idea. He got a nod, and Izuku turned to leave. The beach tonight at 8. He had to show the nerd some deference after that. However, the fight that night elevated the nerd to the status of a worthy rival. Izuku was already waiting for him when he arrived. They prepared without a word. Izuku merely stood and watched as he extended his hands. He wasted no time in charging his adversary after finishing. Izuku just ducked his attack without bothering to move. The air was knocked out of him before he could react, and he was on his back in an instant. You're still predictable, Kachin. He was able to catch his breath in just 1 second. He began to spin, unleashing an explosion. With explosions exploding everywhere, he stood back up, avoiding Izuku. Unflinching, he attempted a leg sweep and let loose as it was sidestepped. Izuku was exposed because he had leapt over the kick. His leg shifted course and connected with a blast. Izuku was thrown back and up by the kick, but there was no serious harm. He launched himself and tried to grab the nerd's torso before he could land. The grab made contact, but he was struck in the back by a huge electrical bolt. He spun forward, throwing Izuku to the ground while fighting through the pain. Hundreds of ice shards flew at him as a storm cloud formed as the dust settled and he touched down. The quantity of them was surprising, but he blasted away what he could. After being nicked by a few, he launched himself forward once more. He couldn't see Izuku because of the cloud, and he saw a spear of ice as he flew toward the crash site. With his hands out in front of him, he detonated a blast that broke it. Izuku took advantage of the situation to kick him. He took the brunt of the blow and struck Izuku with an open palm. Die, nerd. Both were shaken by the explosion. Before the smoke cleared, he felt someone grab his arm and throw him to the ground. Force of nature. He felt so heavy that it was almost impossible to move. They were encircled by 2 pillars of fire. Yield. Suck one, he said, feeling his anger growing. The switch of the dead man. All of his sweat glands simultaneously oozed and ignited. Izuku was pushed back by the explosion it released. The nerd's mobility returned as he moved. He kicked off, flipped up to his feet, and pointed his palms out, not wanting him to regain his footing. Ballistic bombardment. Numerous explosions erupted, engulfing the region. By the time the attack was over, lights had begun to circle Izuku. Eat your own medicine. Planetary bombardment. They had thrown rocks and lights at him. Few had been able to touch him, and he had dodged as best he could. He was burned by the few lights that had managed to touch him. He was aware that he would bruise after taking a rock to the stomach. Both observed one another's appearance as the dust settled. Izuku had soot all over his right side and his clothes were ripped. Must have suffered the most from the assault. He was aware that his shirt wasn't in much better shape and could feel the sea breeze on his skin. "Hey, what the hell are you two doing? I'm calling the cops now." The woman's voice startled them both. They glanced at one another and nodded. After their altercation, they both went home to stay out of trouble. They had nodded to one another when they next saw one another. It felt good to have a competitor deserving of the title, he had to admit. Then he heard the humming of the nerd behind him. Was that Labyrinth? It was. He turned to face his alleged rival and said, "Fuck the teacher." Labyrinth. Really? You couldn't choose a song from this decade? Izuku's cheeks turned red. "Mr. Bakugo, turn around now." He glanced over at Smentos. Cat was laughing, quite loudly. "That was incredible. Stop talking. You were at fault in the first place. You do it all the time, so you could just block it out." Izuku let out a mental groan. Now he felt a fair amount of embarrassment. He heard Kendo laughing behind him and glanced over to see Siro and Jiro. He closed in on himself and said, "I blame you." He received a patronizing response from Kat, who had just calmed down. "Sure kid, sure." Soon after Smentos's departure, Snipe entered. "Howdy students, y'all may call me Mr. Snipe. I'll be teaching ya history. Any questions before I explain the future lessons?" Uraraka extended a hand. "Yes girly." "Why do you talk like that sir?" In his hand, Snipe coughed. "I meant any questions about the class, girl." Uraraka blushed a little but said nothing in response. "As there's no questions, let me explain my class." Until the explanation was finished, Izuku took notes. For him, the remainder of the day dragged on. Heroics, even with all might, was dull. He walked with Kendo and Uraraka to the train station when school let out for the day. Their day came to an end as they boarded different trains. The following day, Akito paid him a visit last night and, per his request, began the summoning process. LVL1 Summoning. One unique subclass of spells is summoning. You must possess the mental flexibility to manipulate the various creatures in addition to having visited other dimensions. Swarm of Rats is the current summons. He practiced his engraving all night because, in Aki's opinion, if he tampered with it, he might unintentionally call forth a very dangerous monster, which brought him to the morning in his current situation, Cat. "Well, this is just as dull as I anticipated." "What did you anticipate? We must be educated by UA, which is still a school. There cannot be fighting and explosions in every class." Unfortunately, there was a brief pause before someone said, "Perhaps W." "Nope, I have a good feeling we would be expelled." "Damn, yes Izuku." He raised his voice, X equals 5y. "We lack information to completely solve for either." "Correct." Ectoplasm nodded, and the lesson went on. "Should we respond to all of the other questions?" "I wait for the others before raising my hand." "I suppose. Do you want to hear some music?" "Go for it. For the remainder of the class, I'll just copy." Woot. A button clicked, and he heard it. A song began to play that he hadn't heard in years. "You wanna be like that." Kat began to sing as she accompanied the song. "I've had enough of being an adult." He began listening to songs his mother had listened to as a child because she had a tendency to play music from decades ago. She had told him that as a child, she enjoyed listening to vintage music. It was strange to feel so old, but it wasn't bad. It's not outdated. They're timeless. Classic denotes age. It's cruel to call it old. Call it classic. You old woman, stop talking. I turned this on full blast, so call me old. What? He asked, feeling an uncontrollable grin appear on his face. Would you like to be referred to as a classic? To you, that is a classic beauty. She turned up the volume and began to sing loudly. This island, you know, is full of just friends kind of people. It suits you well, don't you think? Sure, it's a shame that you don't know the samba. Grinning, he allowed her to carry on singing. 6 songs later, his class was over. Class of Heroics. Good afternoon students. Today we will be heading to the arena. Everyone please get changed. They arrived at the arena's control center 15 minutes later. As Izuku glanced at the screens, he recognized the cityscape as the scene of his battle with Akito. He started by listing names and their partners, saying, "Today we will be holding mock team battles. Your teams have been predetermined and your opponents will be randomized. Midoriya and Jiro." Izuku glanced at the girl, who waved nervously at him before approaching. "I guess we're partners." Izuku grinned and nodded, saying, "Seems so." She laughed a little anxiously, just going to blow them away. "What do you mean?" he asked. tilting his head. Kendo and Uraraka were talking about your performance at the exam. We know you have super strength and a bunch of other abilities. He turned to face the girls, who smiled and waved. Unless you want to be the one to win, he said, squinting at them before turning back to Jiro. What? She asked, staring blankly. If you just want to get this over with, I could, probably. But I'd rather help my teammates learn. He raised his fist to the sky. If you want to win, I'll gladly help you. Red in the face, Jiro began tapping her fingers together. I'd like to try. Izuku turned to All Might and nodded. New skill learned. Charismatic Aura LVL. 1. Using your charisma you are able to calm, enrage, or even force allies to keep fighting beyond their limit. Radius 5 meters. Cooldown 1 hour. I think you broke her. It was your idea. I didn't think it would be that effective. Well, you have to help me deal with this now. She groaned. Fine. Now we will draw your opponents. He drew 2 slips and repeated this until everyone had an opponent. Jiro and Midoriya versus Kirishima and Kaminari. He looked over at his opponents and received a thumbs up from Kirishima. Kaminari gave him a grin. His partner walked up to him. Do you have a plan? He smirked at her. I don't know. What you got? She gave him a shy smile. I don't really know what their quirks are. He nodded. I can help with that. The redhead can harden his body and the other is an electricity user. Jiro nodded and started thinking. The first several groups went and had decent battles, nothing Izuku would consider amazing. That didn't mean they were bad, just smaller compared to some of the fights he had been in. Jiro tapped him on the shoulder. What are you able to do that isn't strength-based? Here we go. He gave a chuckle. Since we got time. Izuku sat hidden in shadow on the second floor. The hallway below him was covered in ice and freezing. He had to admit Jiro's plan was amusing and kind of mean, but if they could get around the traps, it would fall apart. Reaper's shadow. He cast it twice and both hid in the shadows of the first floor. He spoke aloud, knowing Jiro could hear him. All set. With that, a heartbeat could be heard pulsing from every direction. We'd be good workers at a haunted house. Be nice, she's trying. The horn sounded and he could hear the front door slam open. He heard his skeletons activate. He had ordered them to slowly approach the pair and make as much noise as possible. Then a shout and an explosion. Reaper's shadow. A replacement was sent running down the stairs. This continued until he heard an angry shout and a yelp. First trap. Jiro has asked him to draw a rune on the first floor that did 2 things. The first was to only activate when someone walked over it. The second was to create black shadows that popped out of the walls. They weren't shaped very well and were 2D. What on earth is that? That was Kirishima. Charge through it. It doesn't seem to be real. He heard a roar and quick steps. Another explosion went off. Summon. Swarm of rats. A pile of rats started racing down the stairs, each crawled over the other, desperate to get their prey. Wow, he heard stomping, so he cast another spell, Blood Bomb. The spell held on to the crumbling rats and created a tiny ball of blood beneath the floor where he stood, before exploding and spreading a thin layer of blood across the entire hall. He believed he had heard vomit. Weak stomach, snorted cat. It could be either. Jiro must have heard the explosion because she accelerated and raised the pitch of the heartbeat, and he grinned when he heard retreating footsteps. Shortly after, a horn was heard, and the heartbeat ceased. He went to the first floor, where Jiro was sitting and appeared breathless, and broke the ice. He smiled and said, "Well done." After a moment, she accepted his outstretched hand. "You made it possible, but your plan," he said, laughing. "I would have simply attempted to combat them." She grinned and said, "Meathead." As they exited the building, they discovered Kirishima and Kaminari a short distance away, looking pale and covered in vomit. Izuku grinned and helped them up, saying, "Sorry you two, Jiro's idea." They accepted his offer, and he could see that both had suffered some damage using Observe. He applied Medic's Respite to both, saying, "Let me heal both of you." "That wasn't very manly. I was expecting a fight," Kirishima said to him as the color returned to their faces. "Same." Kaminari nodded. Jiro tapped her fingers together and blushed, saying, "Sorry." As they returned to the control room, they struck up a conversation and noticed that several of the students were white-faced and smiling anxiously. Was that an eventful one? "Everyone please head back to the shower room and back to class." All Might called out to him before he could leave after Bakugo's one-sided beating and Todoroki's 2-second victory. "Midoriya, please stay back for a minute." Someone is having problems. After muttering an apology to him and leaving more quickly, Jiro turned and walked back to his mentor, asking, "Yes, sir. I can't have you causing all my students barfing all the time, and I'm pretty sure you scared the daylights out of several." All Might gave Midoriya a smile in spite of his remarks, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Didn't we say not use your necromancy spells in front of anyone?" Izuku nodded. "I believe it was, not to use it in front of civilians due to PR." With a laugh, All Might said, "Just try not to use it too often in class." "What else did you think?" "Yes, sir." Izuku bowed. Keeping his smile intact, All Might said, "I think I've seen horror movies less terrifying." It was Jiro's plan. She said she wanted to win without throwing a punch. "And for that, I thank you," All Might said, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You not only gave her more self-assurance, but you also demonstrated to the students that you wouldn't go all out at once. It offers them some hope." Kat came up with the idea. "We should probably try to be friends," she said. "It even taught me a new skill." "That's fantastic, my boy," said All Might, giving him the thumbs up. "Go change now." "Yes, sir." The following day, the class must elect a representative and an assistant. "You have until your period is over." Aizawa closed his sleeping bag and turned in. Votes were cast and a tally vote was implemented with Iida in the lead. "Now, I'll count the votes. So, how do you feel about Sun Lion?" "They gave me that name because the sun was implied. It sounds redundant to put sun in front of it," he said, closing his eyes and leaning back to speak with her. "That's right. How about Lion Mage? That sounds foolish. I literally don't see you thinking of names. Toru was the only thing on your mind lately." "Stop talking. You are aware that's untrue." "Well, it ought to be. You're a teenager. Don't you consider having sex every 15 minutes or so?" "Myth," he said, rolling his eyes in his head. "I believe the people who came up with that theory were underprivileged as teenagers." "You act," Kat snorted, but Bakugo slammed his desk to get his attention, and he opened his eyes and looked forward. "What?" Izuku turned and his eyes widened as Kachin pointed to the front. "Midoriya. 5. Iida. 4. Momo. 3. All the others had cast their ballots for themselves or a friend they had made. "Are you willing to accept being the class representative?" Iida asked, nodding at him. Izuku sensed that he was being watched. What could possibly go wrong? "I guess. Well, yes. I take it you'd be my assistant." Nodding, Iida said, "It would seem so." He turned to the girl he thought was known by the nickname Momo and said, "If it's okay with you, could you help us? In fact, I cast my vote for you." Nodding and grinning, she said, "I would be delighted." "Now that that's over with, everyone, go back to your seats," Aizawa said as she woke up. "We have a meeting with 1B today after class." He left. "Who in hell cast my ballot? I don't know about the 5th, but Kendo and Uraraka are certain. After the past few days, maybe Hagakure and Jiro. I don't know anyone else either," he muttered as he glanced around the classroom. Lunch. "So, is there anything that your mana cannot accomplish?" Leaning on the table, Izuku considered it. "I can't stop time." He turned to face Kaminari and asked, "Is that relevant?" Kaminari was among those who laughed when he said, "Have you tried? Send Akito a message and inquire." "I'm curious too, I'll do that. I know I can slow it, but I've never tried. Only for a few seconds, and not by much." When Kirishima began to choke on his food, Kaminari said, "Really? I was merely making a joke." Izuku mumbled, "I was trying to figure the extent of my powers at my current strength." With his pointed teeth bared, Kirishima smiled and said, "Want to spar at the next training session?" Izuku grinned and said, "Sure." The entire lunchroom erupted in a loud alarm, and Izuku blinked as everyone began to panic. His mind appeared to follow instructions, and he was standing in the lunchroom entrance after just one sentence. He shouted as loudly as he could, channeling charismatic aura, "Slow down." He continued, "Proceed calmly. If you cause a mass panic, the heroes will be distracted." His shout seemed to grab enough attention, and the first few students were affected by his skill, stopping and slowing the others behind them. He sighed as he moved out of the way, and the students resumed their more orderly behavior after the yelling finally stopped. "I believe our Cha was simply locked." "What do you mean?" "Observe it." He pulled up Charismatic Aura and read his stat sheet, which she had pulled up for him. "This doesn't say anything about a cost," he said. "But it's our only skill like it, and it does have a cooldown. So if I use it, my cha cools down. Looks like it. He was approached by several of his classmates, but Kirishima was the first to approach him and say, "Dude, you look sick. Do you need to see a nurse? Do you think any of them know sign language?" he asked, opening his mouth to speak but then shaking his head without making any sound. "Deserving of a try. Lost my voice," he sighed, and the other students just stared at him strangely. No dice. His classmates trailed behind him as he started to follow everyone else, and an hour later they were sitting in class with Aizawa, reviewing emergency protocols in case something similar to lunch occurred again. Their day ended normally, but the meeting with 1B was cancelled. After 2 weeks. "We're going to USJ today to receive rescue training." He didn't seem to mind. "Everyone grab your costume, and follow me. Normally your heroics teacher would be joining us, but unfortunately for the blonde wonder, he has the flu." Izuku led the march behind Aizawa after everyone lined up after a quick scurry. His teacher turned to face him and said, "Keep noise in the back, quiet in the front." With a nod, Izuku said, "Yes sir. He is going to bed." "I understand." He separated the students based on their level of noise before they boarded the bus, leaving 2 rows between them and Aizawa. "Have any of the instructors mentioned USJ?" He turned back to Kendo, who was seated in the seat behind him, after glancing at Aizawa, who appeared to be sleeping. The Pussycats discussed it extensively. They referred to it as a second home. "Apart from that, I believe I would spoil the surprise." Kendo closed his eyes and listened to music with Kat, nodded, and engaged Uraraka in lively conversation. "What are you going to do?" "I've employed dozens of combative pawns. I have files on every student, and All Might is expected to be there today. Kurogiri is learning how to send each face to the appropriate location. While the children are being killed, I need the Nomus to keep All Might occupied." His master nodded. "What's your goal?" A maniacal grin began to appear on his face as he said, "To send a message to All Might and the rest of the so-called heroes. I'll send them over shortly. Greetings from USJ. I am the facilities manager, and my name is 13. Izuku noticed a number of pupils with wide eyes, but only one was almost vibrating where they were standing. "Uraraka, are you okay?" Instead of stuttering as usual, she grabbed his arm and started shaking him, saying a little too softly to distract him, "It's 13. My favorite hero is her. How about requesting an autograph?" Uraraka stopped and started looking for a pen right away. When she couldn't find one, she said to him, "Do you have anything to write with?" "We were only permitted to bring our briefcases," he said, shaking his head. She just listened, seemingly deflated. "Go inside and change, please. Boys on the left, girls on the right. Do you think something ridiculous is going to be thrown at us?" he asked Kat as he followed everyone inside. "You mean the enormous robots from Heroics?" "Yes, I don't see how, from what I understand. Pixie claims that the purpose of this location was to teach you rescue techniques rather than to engage in combat. That should make today easier." "Boring, you say?" "That as well." He went into the changing room and began to list songs that Kat could play during the training. He had learned lip reading in class one day and had been leveling it up to nearly maximum volume. Being unable to hear and having to focus on every word the teacher said had greatly aided his ability to concentrate. It was confusing when there were several people talking, but it was better than nothing. He first noticed his costume when he opened his briefcase. It was a tribute to all the heroes who had ever supported him thus far, with a black jacket lined with mesh metal and a hoodie that doubled as a half-face mask. He ran a hand over the patches, one of which was a real All Might patch, altered so that it could survive a bullet, another of which was a chibi version of Midnight, and a white scarf with Eraserhead's goggles perched on top, all of which were rather risque. "You mean too much fun?" "Yes." The next 4, which included paw prints of their respective colors and a swirl patch made of a variety of colors, Cat, were all given the All Might treatment. Not even the Pussycats were aware that the set even existed. The patches were the only other color, and the matching pants were simple joggers that matched, with 2 green stripes running down each side from the cuff of his sleeve to the bottom hem. Looking over his shoulder, Kirishima had said, "It looks like a workout outfit." Cat was a bit feisty today. "And yours looks like you're into BDSM. Is that offensive?" He raised an eyebrow and grinned. With his pointed teeth bared, Kirishima grinned and said, "Only if you fight me because of it." Next heroics, if anyone is spared the nerd, it's me. They took notice of Bakugo's declaration. The smiled Kirishima said, "Fight me for the chance. Bring it, Pebble." Bakugo snarled. Any time of day, I'll fight you. Bring it. Hiroshima turned back to Bakugo as he strode out, growling, has he always been like that? What a jackass. Yes, he used to be like his Quirk, explosive and easy to set off, Izuku said, making a mediocre hand gesture. He now resembles a furious Pomeranian. Less attack, more talk. Hiroshima laughed heartily, I'll make sure to let him know that. Grinning, be my guest, it will just make him want to fight me more. He gave him a thumbs up and a shoulder clap, saying, see you out there. Any modifications you think we will need? He asked Cat, nodding as he returned to his costume. 3 throwing knives and a razor-sharp sword. I meant strictly costume changes, he sighed. I understand. All right, what's up with you? You've been acting this way all day and all night. I'm bored, said the speaker after a brief pause. That it? He asked, raising an eyebrow. Yes, I need adventure and action. We haven't done anything but study for the past 3 weeks. This Sunday, I could ask Akito to take us to the Shadowscape. Thank you, no problem. All you had to do was ask. I'm not going to say no to everything you ask me to do, he said mildly. You absolutely ought to have done it. It was just the girls' changing room. You should not endorse any of that student's beliefs because he is a threat to women everywhere. Lame, said Kat, blowing a raspberry. Whatever, have you prepared the playlist? Let's do this. One really fantastic playlist full of classics. Hell yeah, I do. I hope you leave here with the understanding that you have powers in order to help others. Kendo saw Uraraka nod in agreement as she whispered something to him. That's all. I appreciate you listening. When the students began cheering for 13, Aizawa took charge and didn't bother to try to calm them down. They settled down gradually. He took out a clipboard and began listing names, saying, today we will be splitting up into 2 groups and going around to the various areas in rotation. Group 1 will include Iida, Yaoyorozu, Asui, Ojiro, Hiroshima, Kota, Sato, Shiro, Tokiyami, and Bakugo. Please follow 13, everyone else. As it was explained, I will be taking you to each of the sections, she said as the 10 students followed him and went down the stairs. 13 turned to them and asked, please follow me. We'll start with the scenario of a blizzard. Code red, villains inbound, communications down. Cat cried halfway down the stairs, Aizawa's group in front of them. Everybody, get out, the villains are on the way. Can we send out a message to Aki? He yelled, without bothering to check if the students followed his example, and began dragging Hagakure and Uraraka back up the stairs. A window was pulled up by Cat. Right now, Dead Zone is having an effect on you. It is impossible to communicate with the outside world in any way. Keep trying every minute, there should be a brief respite soon, Shiro said, dragging a few others behind him as he flew up the stairs toward the exit, followed by Tsuyu. The pavilion erupted in a loud whirring noise, and all of the students and teachers turned to see a huge black portal opening. A few seconds later, a couple dozen villains poured through, and a person a little older than him strutted out arms wide in the center of the pack. Izuku could hardly hear him because of the distance and the hand covering his mouth. All Might seems to be missing from this raid. Perhaps in order to call him, we must murder the ads. 13 Get the kids out of here. Eraserhead turned to face them, standing farther down the stairs than anyone else. He put on his goggles and leapt to the pavilion, his scarf and hair falling loose. How does he accomplish that? It's not time. Izuku saw her face shield broken, probably out for the count, as 13 waved everyone to follow, saying, kids follow me, we're headed toward the entrance. As they reached the top, she was blasted backward down the stairs toward the pavilion. As several portals opened, a flat voice said, I apologize, but you cannot leave. Jump. He instinctively jumped into the air and used air step to jump even higher, giving him a bird's eye view of the events that transpired as the students were forced through the portals by an unseen force. A portal opened in his landing path before he hit the ground, correcting his fall and landing on his feet in the center of the pavilion. You must be Midoriya. He spun in midair to see a man flying above him. He raised a hand but was instantly blasted down by a strong force of wind. Midoriya, pass the skill check. Mana shield. The creature that had attacked him immediately rushed him and collided with the shield, which held but cracked severely. Observe. His body threw itself to the side and rolled into a standing position. Name. Subject 52 of Project Nomu. Level 1. Strangeness. Flesh knitting. titanium bones, elastic muscles, and invisibility bursts. HP, mana, stamina. Even after its normal stamina is depleted, this creature will still fight. STR, 611. Drawback, 672. Dex, 328. Agi, 417. Int, 32. Wis, 40. Cha, 24. Res, puppet template. This being obeys orders from a superior and lacks free will. Fuck. The air crackled and the familiar weight of the spear formed in his hand as the pillars raced toward the thing, the fire pulsing to life and the air turning bright white as the electricity flared out. Frost Dirk. He jumped back and cast, not wanting to remain motionless. Pillars of Hell, Frost Giant's Spear, Odin's Rage. He quickly summoned the dagger and sacrificed it to block the being's fist, spinning with the punch, twirling the spear and cut in the thing's neck. The spear went through the skin, but stopped when it struck the spine, shattering into nothing, and he kicked off the ground to get some distance in preparation for a counterattack. It appears that our information was accurate. You certainly seem like a troublemaker. With hands all over his body, the villain pointed at him and seemed to smile sickly. Nomu, kill him. The so-called Nomu blinked itself to oblivion. Mana shield. The shield cracked badly, then shattered. He used the brief millisecond of bright light to jump away and cast more spells. Mana storm. Stinging rain. Body of gods. His body was encircled by gold aura after Cat's spell was complete. They had unlocked the second level of Wisdom of 2, a little less than a week ago, which gave Cat the ability to cast spells on her own initiative. The only drawback was that it had a 5-minute cooldown. Fortunately for him, she appeared to process information far more quickly than he did, and a fist struck his head, sending him flying into a nearby wall. Dodge. He slammed a toe into the ground, breaking it, but his quick reflexes prevented him from being hit in the head again. Keep backpedaling. Recast your buffs. The Nomu's invisibility ended when the 4 spells took effect, and it leapt after him before he could cast another spell. Hermes' Blessing, Sylph's Blessing, Body of Gods, Frost Giant's Spear. Both were centered on the spear, and as it shot toward the Nomu, he cast Emergency Aid on his foot. The scream's force kept him in the air and slammed the Nomu back into the ground. When the spell ended, he used Air Step and leapt higher. Momentum Bomb, Thundered Weapon. Both of the spells he cast on it exploded in a loud boom and left a small crater where it struck the ground. He cast the spear again and prepared to throw it after it pierced the thing's right thigh and blood spattered the floor behind it. The hole made by his spells was all that was left when the dust settled. Sight of the Hunter. A huge ball of light formed less than a few meters away from him, and he launched a air step and shifted course in midair. He cancelled the sight spell and leapt down into a hole in a fiery dome, and the Nomu flew into a nearby ruined building and out of range. What's the plan? He felt the ecstasy and crazed bliss rolling off her as he landed on a roof that collapsed under his weight, then jumped again and landed in a narrow alleyway. We must burn this thing or it will continue to regenerate. He used the spell to see that the leg he had attacked was still whole, albeit undoubtedly torn. He looked up but was unable to see the actual ceiling. Fire bombs are out unless you can make a hole in the ceiling. Maybe. A huge explosion interrupted him. Kachan. We could throw him. Cat seemed pleased with her suggestion, and he fled out of the alleyway and began running down the makeshift road, receiving instructions from a collapsed building and another explosion farther down. Perish. Another explosion followed by a scream suggests that the explosion was intended to gain distance rather than kill, as Kachan was flung sideways across the street. He grabbed his friend and threw himself as hard as he could without one for all. Momentum Bomb, Gravity Assist. Before Izuku threw him, they spun twice. Kachan added his own spin to the throw, something he had done previously to fend off a swarm of robots. Comet Attack. The surrounding buildings took less damage than the epicenter, but they were still leveled. Sweat formed a cone behind Bakugo and gave the appearance of a comet. When it struck the invisible villain, all of the sweat, including the amount he had already saved, went off in a huge explosion. Sight of the Hunter. After the spell revealed what was probably Bakugo standing over a collapsed form, he heard something crashing through a wall and then heard the sound of something crumbling. He turned to face the noise and caught a glimpse of the prone form moving again, which made him think, no wonder Bakugo was having a hard time. Cat's voice made him pay attention to the dim aura that was growing brighter by the second. Don't get distracted, that thing is still after us. Bone Blade, Thundered Weapon. He prepared his weapon and himself as another explosion occurred. The aura moved quickly toward him, and he used another spell once it was within range. Ethereal Haunt. After the world turned gray, he avoided the monstrous creature's charge and used his foot to touch the back of its knee. The spell ended, and he swiftly used One for All to charge his foot. Smash. The Nomu's knee was snapped by the loud stomp, which fortunately did not break his foot. He leapt to his feet and hurled the blade at the knee, which was now on the ground. He was able to skewer its abdomen, and a moment later the blade exploded, and although the cloud of ivory dust blocked his view of the damage, he could clearly see the Nomu's aura rising. Let's embrace him. He threw an arm back and leapt higher into the air, saying, Frost Giant's Weapon, Thundered Weapon, Momentum Bomb. As soon as the final spell was cast, he charged his hand and threw, saying, Arctic Lightning Smash. A loud boom sounded as the spear struck, tearing a hole through the Nomu's chest, clearing the cloud of ivory dust and ending the creature's invisibility. He saw as its flesh stretched itself into thin strings and reached across the child-sized hole in its chest, growing thicker when they touched and repairing the damage he had managed to inflict. The bioelectricity that seemed to come off him when he used One for All, combined with the sub-spell and the wind pressure, accelerated the spear's speed. Aside from almost killing ourselves, any ideas? We could either find Icy Hot to freeze it in a block of ice, or we could help the stick of dynamite defeat the man he's fighting to free him and cause a hole in the ceiling to use fire bombs, she said with a cheerful hum. We can't leave Kachan here alone and we have no idea where Todoroki is, he decided almost immediately, casting Emergency Aid on his hand before kicking off toward his friend using Air Step. He was pushed through the portal and into some kind of blizzard-like space inside, and behind him a thin female voice said, Hello Peppermint. There was no question in his mind that the voice belonged to a villain, so he sent a wave of ice at it. He thought he missed it, but when he heard no cry of alarm, he turned to see a tall woman, at least taller than his sister, standing behind him. She was wearing a long white kimono with icy blue embroidery, and his ice phased through her. Ah, does my little Peppermint not like me? She said, crossing her arms and holding them beneath her chest. He sent several volleys of ice and walked back slowly to give himself some space after letting out a mental sigh. I'm afraid it won't work, kiddo. Ice and snow are my element. I'm sorry, but I can't let you leave Peppermint. He stamped the ground and formed a shell of ice in an attempt to tear apart the dome, but as he began to rise, his makeshift spear lurched to the side and threw him back toward the ground. The woman walked through his ice and into the sphere with him, and she waved her hands, causing the ice surrounding them to flow into the ground. This is bullshit, he said, snapping to his feet and using the judo he did know to lay the woman out with a simple throw. Unwilling to be close to her, he enveloped himself once more, leaving him with no choice but to run, pushing a pillar of ice away from himself with all the force he could muster, and the pillar slammed into his cage, sending him flying toward the wall. He halted in midair, her face emerged within the shell, and he said, Now I'm mad, you die now. The shell surrounding him exploded inward, turning into spikes, and he quickly expanded a smaller shell. Putting up a wall of ice to keep them apart, he sent 2 spikes of ice to wrench a hole through the wall, and he was far enough ahead and apparently out of her control to allow his escape. He dropped to the ground and rode a wave of ice the rest of the way, seeing her in the corner of his eye riding the snow behind him. The villain's words, you can go, but I'll just play with the other little sweeties in here, prevented him from jumping through the hole created by the 2 spikes. He felt his blood freeze and turned to face her, who was already heading back. The poor little Froggy and Invisigirl won't survive as long as you. The villain turned and gave him a sickly smile, but it vanished when she saw the first embers. No one would know, he would never find out. He fully activated his quirk and covered the entire dome with a layer of ice so thick that hardly any light could pass through. The blessing of Sylph. Leap for the hole. Bakugo will be mine. Dropping the body, he ran toward a nearby destroyed building where Bakugo was fighting the body drone. He threw Tokiyami as far as he could without making it dangerous, then spun around and grabbed the approaching fist. He then charged One for All into his fist and slammed a closed fist against the Nomu's head, which spun around twice and snapped violently. Just burn him. We cannot murder. Then turn him off. How? Cut his limbs off. You morbid bee. Stupid. Blades of mana. Kachan grunted as he flew past him. Get to the pavilion, I'll keep them distracted. 2 blades made of forest green protruded from his hands. Plan. We go crazy and hug that fucking monster. I like. He snarled, and the first person he saw was the man who looked like a zombie. Thunderous weapon. He had his arms ready, and as soon as the man was within range, he struck. The blade sank in, and the sub-spell instantly went off. With a loud boom, lightning assisted his slash, breaking bone and cutting the remaining flesh. When the arm fell, he used his gravity to pick it up and leapt back, with it orbiting him. Flash fire aura. His skin erupted into fire, radiating an aura hot enough to weaken solid steel, and the fleshy arm that was hovering around him turned black almost instantly, and started to shrink from the heat. No, the man, named Watanabe Guro, charged him far more vigorously than before. Izuku jumped out of the way and let the arm turn to a burned husk. He looked on in impassive hate as the man teared up and was on the verge of crying. "You're no hero. That thing is just as much of a monster as you are." Izuku spun around, saying, "Mana shield." The blue aura was broken when the fist struck it, sending him flying backward and deeper into the fire zone. "Hug, we should get away from the guy. I don't mind if he maims me, but I won't kill him. Then toss him and go for the fucking monster." HP, high yellow. Stamina is low green, and mana is high yellow. It could be worse, but not bad. He was flung against the ground, his arm snapped, and he took a hard hit to his HP. Cut it. Gamer's mind worked double time as his panic was replaced with pure icy calm. Using the blade in his hand, he cut off his arm and kicked backward hard. Emergency aid. She didn't see it coming. "Thanks," he said, breaking through a damaged wall and recasting the spell. "No time. Get your sorry ass out of here. Now." He followed her advice and pushed off an air platform and charged through the dome ceiling. Outside in the pavilion, chaos was raging, with Bakugo and Tokiyami joining the fray as each of them battled a villain. Eraserhead barely holding back the villains as he was trapped guarding a small group of students, and a huge ice ball enclosing the blizzard area. "Icy hot is in there," an hour says. "Not right now. We need assistance." 6. Mana shield. He was launched through the air after being attacked in the back. "Turn on your sight." As he was going straight for the later and didn't want to stay in the Nomu's path, he jumped as hard as he could with air step and realized he didn't have either of his normal buffs when he started to fall fairly quickly. Sight of the hunter. He saw a large aura approaching from the fire dome and saw a man floating in the sky. Observe the roof. He felt a smile appear on his face as he turned his head and noticed a faint aura sitting on top of the roof before it disappeared. Sylph's blessing. Hermes' blessing. The villain Bakugo was fighting was his target, and he kicked off a step and somersaulted forward with a leg outstretched forward. His rival must have noticed him because he leapt back from a melee and launched himself at a villain attacking Uraraka. Lewis smashed. The kick made a sickening pop sound, and a villain brandishing a sword forced him to dodge an attack. Kachan. He landed close to his friend after leaping backward away from the sword wielder. "What on earth do you desire?" Izuku had known him long enough to know that he was under stress, even though most people would say he was eager to resume the fight. "Roof. I'm going to launch you. Take it down, everything. You understand." A grunt and an outstretched arm were given to him. Her gloves were mostly gone, her hands were cut and covered in gouges, and Ojiro's hands and tail were almost as bad as her own. Zero was nowhere to be found. The last time she had seen him, his helmet had been split in half, and he had vanished behind a number of fallen buildings engaged in combat with a villain. This qualifies as an emergency, correct? To find the backup plan, she leapt behind a piece of ruined building and reached into her bag, the rough, sturdy leather rubbing against her open wounds, and when her fingers touched a cool piece of crystal, she pulled out a crystal whistle that was covered in blood droplets hanging from a silver chain. When she put the whistle to her lips, it emitted a low shrill that didn't sound natural at all, and when she ran out of breath and pulled away from it, the whistle began to crumble and turn to dust, leaving only the silver chain behind. She had learned that Midoriya had gotten it from a friend, who had gotten it from somewhere, and that if she blew this, it would shatter. He had advised her to use it only in an emergency because there was no way to get another one. She was not prepared for the person who emerged, but a few quiet seconds passed before a purple disc, similar to the ones Midoriya appeared and vanished out of, appeared. Just a second before. "Hey, get moving." Mickey, one of her new friends, began to giggle beside her after she made a face behind the teacher's back. "I can run circles around you, old man," she said, keeping her voice low enough to be heard. "You are new," Mickey said with a smile and a little panting. "To get him to stop talking, you should try to demonstrate your abilities." "All that would do is turn others against me," she shrugged. "Do you believe the boys would accept me abandoning them?" She arched an eyebrow. Probably not, but from the little time I've known you, she said with a smile. You probably don't give a damn. The jocks of her class were far ahead, and she grinned and said, you're right. I'll see you in a bit. Blessing of Hermes. K. She began slowly but quickly gained enough speed to almost immediately catch up to the boys, smiling at their faces and calling back to them, don't try to keep up. She heard a few irate yells, but the faster pace of footsteps behind her was even more amusing, so she smiled and ran a little faster, not expecting the low whine that echoed in her ears. Shit. Dimensional door. The portal opened, and she rushed through it mindlessly. A little girl with the most angry face she had ever seen on a child, dressed in elementary school gym clothes, appeared. Her hair had a strange tinge of orange and purple, and it changed to confusion when she saw Kendo sitting on the ground. Who are you? She had a very childlike voice. Well, I'm a classmate of Midoriya's, Kendo, and he advised me to use the whistle in case we got into trouble. I located you. She jumped away and in front of the newcomer when she heard the villain's loud voice, who had attacked them. A kid. Seriously, Izuku? She asked. What's happening? Villains attacked, she replied without turning. We require assistance. Is there anything else? She glanced over her shoulder and said, no. Kendo went blind and heard nothing but a loud ringing, and she couldn't tell how much time had passed before it began to clear up, but the first thing she heard was the girl's voice, Odin's last stand. The girl nodded and held up a hand toward the villain who produced a knife. Odin's last stand. A bright white light and boom came out of her hand. She waved the apology away, her vision clear, saying, it's okay. Have you gotten him? She chuckled a little and said, you could say that. Kendo noticed the man on the ground, unconscious, and said, he's not dead. I hit him with a rock, and the light was to blind him. Where's my friend now? She asked, turning to face the girl. After hearing a loud crash from the pavilion, both of them looked up to see the dome above them beginning to collapse. Get close. She held out a hand to Ojiro, who was bleeding and unconscious in a pile of debris. He began to levitate and was drawn quickly toward them. When he was laid next to her, the girl held up a hand, and a blue orb appeared around them, turning the larger pieces of glass that had fallen on it to nothing. Go through the portal with your companion. You'll get to the school with it. Please hurry. I'll leave the portal open for the teachers. The girl left after another of the discs materialized. Dash. It was a little awkward to throw Bakugo with just one arm, but he succeeded. Mr. Aizawa. Izuku spun around to see the second Nomu grab his teacher by the head, and just then the Nomu that had been on him finally grabbed him too, throwing them both to the ground. As the other students were being subdued, he looked up to see Bakugo engaged in combat with the floating man in midair. Hug. I'm not going to sacrifice my peers. Then come up with something. The person with the hands all over him said, bring the annoying one. Izuku used observe on the ringleader after being picked up in a hold, and instead of trying to read it, he let Kat give him the synopsis. Shimura Tenko's quirk is decay. His statistics aren't exaggerated, but he is comparable to or superior to your best classmates. As he approached, Shimura's face lit up with a broad smile. Congratulations, mini-boss, you're going to be the first sacrifice. He caught him by the face with an open palm and withdrew it when nothing happened. The Fu, a hero even in the face of death. Great, but pointless. Shut his eyes, Nomu. Izuku heard a cry of agony. He knew she was right, but what could he do? Her incessant shouting was honestly beginning to get on his nerves. Eraser had probably just sacrificed his quirk to save you. Do something, he said. Flare. I won't take the chance of hurting my classmates. The other one, not that one. I only have one arm, so that still won't work. Let's try this Aga. He was interrupted by a blast that echoed throughout the complex, and shortly after, the dome collapsed in huge pieces. Nomu, keep me safe. Hermes' blessing Izuku was dropped, and he started to run toward the villains who were holding the students in check. 3. He probably broke something when he roundhouse kicked one of them, but Tokiyami and Aoyama were spared, and he called forth Dark Shadow to envelop them in a cocoon. 2. He pretended to punch the second man in the face, and though he blocked the blow with his hands, he failed to see the kick go for his leg, and a loud snap sent the man landing on top of Kota. 1. He leapt forward, casting Ice Giant's weapon and using the emergency strength runes Aki had drawn on him. He willed the spell to transform into a sword, and it did so. He slashed the Nomu's arms, picked up Eraserhead, and threw himself and his teacher at the villain who was holding Uraraka captive. He let his teacher fly through the air and cast Ethereal Haunt. As Cat said 0, he grabbed his teacher with the aid of his gravity and drew Uraraka toward him. Mana Shield. With a thought, his runes activated, and he grabbed the man by the arms, causing the spell to end and Izuku to pull quickly and forcefully. He wasted almost no time as the man's arms were pulled off, and he dove past him. As the first piece of glass struck the floor, the blue aura came to life. He glanced at the girl who was holding his left arm and said, "You must leave, take Mr. Aizawa, and hide. I'll take care of you. Get out of here, let me fight unhindered." He handed her the man after receiving a shaky nod, and as the final glass fell, he broke the spell and ran in front of the students, who were fortunately unharmed by the glass save for a few scraps on Kota. The mist villain was nowhere to be seen, and instead of looking to see if they had done as he had instructed, he continued to focus on the ringleader and Nomu's. Cat messaged Aki to ask for assistance. On it. You move pretty quickly. He extended his arms toward the Nomus and said, "Do you really think you could even hold off the Nomus? Not as fast as All Might, but still fast. All Might is supposed to be killed by these things." He chuckled dryly, and Izuku's arm had healed by the time he composed himself. "Here, that's all it says," she says. Shimura smiled and gestured to him with both hands, saying, "Nomus, go kill him." Using his sight spell, Izuku flipped backward to avoid both of the reckless swings, then used air step to charge forward and clothesline both. As his arms got close to them, he summoned the tiny sun inside of him, saying, "Solar flare." Only 2 seconds left. He felt himself scream in anger. 1. Now, he felt his skin begin to blister and char, his arms and body erupt in a fire hot enough that not even his own quirk could handle, the metal that made up his clothes beginning to melt away, the fabric fibers holding it together burning away, the rancid smell of burning flesh permeating the air. HP is in the high red. Mana is sitting at half and stamina is high yellow. He ended his quirk and remained on the ground where he had landed during the attack, surrounded by smoke and steam, and looking down at his own hands, which were crispy and heavily bleeding. Izuku, not bad. He tried to look up, but his neck was covered in hardened flesh, but he could recognize Aki's voice from anywhere. "You still need to build up your resistance, but it's a nice attack." My. That was pretty impressive, I must say." Shimura began to clap, but stopped when he spoke again. "This one was probably intended to deal with All Might, not you." In contrast to that, Endeavor's flame appears feeble. Izuku, making his own flesh move, looked up to see one of the Nomus standing in front of Shimura, rapidly regenerating itself. Aki had cast emergency aid on him and smiled, saying, "I'll protect you as long as I can, but you need to get on your feet, fast." The other was lying on the ground beside him, smoking and burned to a crisp. When the standing one was done, it put its arms down to reveal an ever-present grin. He felt his skin begin to cool quickly, and a yellow light surrounded him. He nodded, though his mouth was sealed shut and he couldn't open it. "All right." The balls accelerated and rushed the two in front of them as she snapped her fingers, creating tiny, glowing motes. "Let's do this." At Ua. Kendo pulled herself to the main walkway while carrying Ojiro and screamed as loudly as she could, "Help!" 2 students ran toward her a second later. What took place? The person who spoke had a simple face, but it was overshadowed by his concern and friendliness. The students and Mr. Aizawa are still engaged in combat after the attack on USJ. A portal is waiting for the teachers in the parking lot. Amajiki, a plain face turned dark. "Visit the nurse's office with these two. I will go and assist." "Are you certain?" Kendo watched as the unadorned one ran off toward the parking lot and the one named Amajiki picked them both up in his arms. "Yes, follow through with help once these two are safe." He was nodded. "They'll be all right. Lemillion is en route." She received a feeble smile. Iida, he fell off the side of the cliff, and she watched. She felt her heart sink when he vanished over the ridge. Shoji was trapped defending on a narrow ledge and was putting up a weak fight when the villain started attacking. Because of the villain's air manipulation quirk, neither of them could successfully combat a flying foe. Her thoughts darkened as she felt the tears begin to fall down her cheeks. "Ah, little girlie, you give up." An all-candle wax container in the shape of a ball, to maintain its shape, with a thin coating of glass. He smiled at her and asked, "What ya got there, girlie?" The smile turned predatory as he said, "You know, if you give up and accept me, I'll treat you pretty nicely." Packed with a substance. For every chlorine atom, 3 fluorine atoms are added. enough to make it difficult for the ball to contain it. You know what? How about a deal? I'll give you a single shot and not move. If you miss or it does nothing, I win. If it hurts, you win. What do you say? Tears were streaming down her cheeks. A straightforward delivery system. A slingshot. Deal. His grin infuriated her even more. Removing the glass container from the slingshot's pouch. Deal. She snarled and released the ball. Shoji climbed over the edge and picked her up as it flew. He leapt over the edge before she could resist his grip. She didn't scream, but she did turn to watch the man's face light up with shock as his skin began to burn. The part of her that was enraged for vengeance was filled with his screams. Iida was safely concealed behind a rock when she looked down at the ground. As she struck the spongy ground, all of her rage vanished. She lay there and began to cry. She had to be picked up and carried by Shoji. After that, she had no idea where they went. Fortunately for Kirishima and Kaminari, Sato was dropped over the boat that was adrift in the lake. They had resisted in the captain's quarters after being dragged to safety. Kaminari was able to zap anyone who approached close enough because Kirishima was in the front and in the entrance. Some of the villains had chosen to aim for the windows, while Sato was protecting the back. We can't keep this up forever. He slammed his fingers into a blue-skinned man's stomach and said, "We'll fight as long as we need to." Without further comment, Kaminari turned to assist Sato in defending the windows. I am also beginning to run low. A loud boom filled the entire dome, and several of the villains looked up in terror and fled. We need a getaway. A few others struggled more to enter their room, but they were repelled by him blocking their path and Kaminari helping them. He was unable to determine whether or not what he had done was correct. Large pieces of glass either flattened or pierced the villains who weren't standing under cover. Something crashed into the boat, tossing it to the side. To prevent it from sinking, emergency procedures were triggered and a large number of airbags were deployed. Kaminari stood up and said, "The hell was that?" A smirk appeared on his lips. He leapt to his feet and dragged the others to the exit, saying, "Bakugo." With his quirk working overtime, he charged out over the bodies and discovered his friend already engaged in combat. We need to help him. Since it was 4-on-6, their fight became one-sided, and he was fairly certain that Bakugo alone accounted for 3 people. When a bright light emerged from the pavilion, it was over. He felt as though the sun was beating down on him and he was standing in weather that was 44 degrees Celsius. He walked to the boat's edge with his classmates, covering his eyes to keep out the light. He could just make out the tiny figures standing upright as he looked toward the pavilion across the lake. As the other stood behind him, one seemed to have been the target of the attack. Bring it down. Be you. Just do it. Wah. Do it. Bile rose in her throat and she bit it back. She gave her next attack her all after stabbing her one good jack into the ground. They were attacked by a villain who had a quirk that allowed him to nullify acids. That wouldn't have been a problem for them on its own. No, it was the sword he carried about that was the problem. As time passed, Ashido's anger and desperation grew. She was afraid of the consequences, not the complexity of her friend's plan. While they were running uphill, they had found the area's hydraulics. Ashido desired to literally throw the mountain's face at the man. She was fairly certain that it would most likely kill him, but was there anything else they could do? She had to actually drop the platform because her friend's trick had already melted the supports. She closed her eyes and said, "Heartbeat whisper." The low beat grew louder and more frequent after starting out slowly. Ashido attempted to cling to her as the ground began to wobble beneath them. She brushed the hand away. Stop. Her head was in her knees as she sat down. There was only one thought as she listened to the ground above her crashing downward. I killed someone just now. Fairy party. She opened a portal beneath Izuku and sent him a considerable distance away as the lights attacked the 2 individuals in front of her. Her second spell was cast less than a second later. Aegis of Sparta. Spectral creatures materialized in time to stop the monster's tackle. Super speed and strength, along with damage reflection and almost instantaneous regeneration. This thing is a little absurd. Blood bomb. The tiny droplets of blood from the nearby charred bodies gathered in front of her. Kill switch. Pass the spell check. She teleported into the air as the Nomu approached within an inch. Halo of childhood. The spell created a hula hoop-like halo of light that encircled her. Only a single touch is required. Ethereal haunt. As the world became gray, she leapt forward. Up close, the Nomu was even more unsightly. Its face resembled a cartoon chicken drenched in ink, and its brain was visible. She reached out and touched the thing's neck, saying, "I doubt it has anything good besides the quirks." Quirk Incorporated. Level of molecular reassembly, max. Even when death is in front of your body, it refuses to die. It will use the resources needed to recreate your body as long as there is even one cell left of you. You will be able to remember things at maximum level. 72-hour cooldown period. Therefore, it's a death save rather than regeneration. Good. Armor of Athena. When the thing struck her, her bronze armor immediately got dented. Switch kill. A few meters away, her body vanished and reappeared. The ball of blood burst into a gooey necrotic energy in her place. Blade of the Fallen. She called forth the shattered blade in the Nomu's path and allowed it to skewer itself. She allowed her halo to finish while it released its torso. The effects of Halo of Childhood are currently affecting you. The following is what you have gained. All spell expenses are cut in half. Every spell variable has been cut in half. Spells will fluctuate at random. You can use your imagination to control this effect. We'll see what we have. Notice Gale, a violent storm with lightning and a land-destroying force at its core. She did benefit from daydreaming during class. Her call was answered by the spell, which typically pushed enemies away and called forth a little storm at the end. The Blessing of Sylph, the soft murmur of a creature so light that it dances with the wind, leaving behind ice storms. A tornado began to form beneath her feet, and she began to rise in the air. Odin's Fury, standing before the enemy, prepared to pay the price, anger simmering in a god's heart. Her eyes glowed blue as lightning crackled around her body. She could sense her rage building and her desire to take charge. She used her final halo-buffed spell while the Nomu was nearly free. Shadows of the Reaper. Skeletal hands exploded from the ground and clawed their way out when their leader called, and the kin responded with a shout so loud it rocked the bedrock of the heavens and shook the ground. When they were free, they roared in unison and launched a coordinated attack. The end of Halo of Childhood. She calmed her nerves by inhaling and exhaling slowly. Blessing of Hermes. The whirring sound intensified and reached a roaring crescendo. He got up and said, "We need to run." Uraraka took hold of his arm and said, "You're still hurt." He turned back to the fight and said, "I'll be fine." "We'll be less fine if we stay here." Cocoon. Passed the resistance check. Uraraka and the unconscious Mr. Aizawa were flung backwards when a shock wave struck them. Aki had used Force Bomb, a spell that typically struck targets at 160 km per hour. But this time, the spell struck the Nomu hard and came to a halt. The force acted as though it struck an immovable object, but it didn't dissipate. The spell had crashed over them and spread outward. The Nomu's flesh was being bitten and clawed by the skeletons that Aki had called forth. He picked up his classmate and the floating Mr. Aizawa by turning back toward her. The pain was beginning to lessen, but his skin was still sensitive. Time to leave. You have 30 seconds. You're going to be fighting for your life soon, so get these two safe. I believed I was fighting for my life already. You were defending the life of your classmate. It's now a battle for both yours and Aki's. The voice from the scenario of the destroyed city asked, "Does anyone need help?" Who? Cat blew a loud wolf whistle as the person rounded the corner. Red in the face already, Uraraka turned cherry red and covered her eyes. Cat, stop, please. Upon spotting them, the man sprinted in their direction, grinning broadly and apparently unaware of his nudity. Are you two okay? He pushed the floating Aizawa and the self-blinded red-faced girl toward him, asking, "Yeah. Do you mind taking these two? My friend is in trouble. I'm going to go help her." But, before the man could finish, he fled. Does he know he's naked? The girl gave a head nod. She was red all the way down to her fingertips and had her eyes covered. Should hurry. He hummed a little and picked up the teacher and child before heading back toward the hiding place. That weird portal closed, but I found a safe spot to hide. You'll be fine until the teachers show up. He knocked on a section of the fallen wall and waited. The dark, shadowy figure that emerged from the child he had met earlier picked it up. He pushed them both in once the wall was out of the way. I'll be back soon. The hand seized him as he turned to look for more people. The red-faced girl who owned the hand was staring at him frantically. Please help our class president. Mirio nodded slightly, feeling his blood pound. I'll try. Lightning rush. With the help of the storm that surrounded her, the spell illuminated a number of paths and vaporized everything in its path. The Nomu was flying at her after breaking the spell. Frost Giant's armaments. A dozen ice spears materialized, and they shot forward with her telekinesis spell. With an absurdly powerful punch, the Nomu broke each. It didn't even slow down. She raised both hands before it could land on her. Duel cast. Gale of Notice. The spell struck the Nomu, sending it flying backwards, since it was in midair and had no means of movement. It struck the retaining wall of the pavilion and rose as if it had never been there. Stay down, damn it. Hades pillars. The typically red portals rapidly whirled and took on a purple hue. Both grew and let loose their damned fire as they sped ahead. Instead of burning flesh like a typical fire, they ignited the nervous system. She watched as the Nomu halted its run and stood there trembling. She continued to cast spells one after the other, unwilling to stop. Mana bow, bone arrow, momentum bomb, hellish weapon. She held a bow composed of her own solid mana, and when she drew back the string and aimed, the arrow materialized. They spiraled and emitted light as the last two spells came to a close. Letting go, the arrow sped through the air, piercing the beast's chest with an ear-piercing cry. It appeared to be dead as it fell forward on its front. Nomu, stop messing with the girl and kill her already. Its eyes opened abruptly, and it started to get back up. Really, how is the healing process going? She raised her hand to call forth multiple layers of bone wall to surround her in a dome. She quickly carved several runes into it after calling forth a single Reaper's Shadow. For her, the action was swift and almost instantaneous. Destruction, mana storage, multi-target, barbed spears, reeling chains, explosion. She sensed the second to last wall shatter and recast. Her body turned entirely transparent, and she used a rune to teleport up through the final barrier before it broke. Forgotten life, mimicry of life. The skeleton had assumed her appearance as a result of the second spell. The Nomu grabbed her decoy and tore it in two when the last wall collapsed. As she observed what transpired next, she grinned. Sucker. The Nomu was skewered all over its body by the spears that erupted from the broken skeleton. They were drawn backward, drawing the creature nearer to the skeleton as the final spear pierced its flesh. Then it burst into a blast powerful enough to knock her back and break her invisibility. Sadly for her and the others, the thing returned as if it had never happened. Large pieces of flesh and an entire arm were missing from its body, but they gradually began to reappear. She muttered to herself and let out an irritated huff. A quick look around the area revealed no one, but that didn't mean anything. Someone has to be healing it. Some quirks are such BS. She was aware that this was hypocritical, but she felt justified in complaining because it wasn't working for her. She jumped a little higher with air step still floating in midair from her earlier spells. There was a reason why her mother never cast spells with a Japanese base while she was living. Using their names didn't bother the gods of Olympus or most other pantheons. However, the Japanese gods regarded it as an oath. Unfortunately for her, she was an inquisitive child. Long ago, she had taken an oath. As clouds gathered over her, the sunny day turned gloomy. On the brightest day, I am the darkness on the horizon. In the rage of the storm, I stand firm. After fully recovering, the Nomu knelt down and got ready to leap. In every drop of rain, the floods rise. It leapt, heading directly for her. Before she heard a cry, it had been just a few meters above the ground. Planetary smash. Izuku whirled around and kicked twice with a roundhouse. The Nomu flew back toward the ground after the attack. She said, "Life flourishes under my blessing. I join two beings for life." Izuku, who was naked and standing on his single intact leg, struggled to give her time. The Nomu was constantly grounded or thrown off course by the numerous spells he sent. "I am the harvester, I am the priest." A swirling black portal opened before her as the sky darkened enough to block out the sun. The face of a man who appeared to be composed of black smoke emerged. He extended his hand to grasp her, but someone else pulled him down. Despite having simple features, he had a tough expression. "I am the wave caller, I am the bringer of storms." Rain and lightning begged for her release from the clouds. "I am the herald." A villain, who she hadn't seen before, floated up to her and pulled an arm back. He was stopped just in time. A teenager, with a single gauntlet in the shape of a grenade, launched himself at the villain. In a fist fight of explosions and wind, they fell toward the ground. "Listen to the hymn of my god." The wind howled and spun at the tip of the spear. The lightning solidified into a solid metal, tingles vibrating through her hand. Susanoo's roar. The spear took off in a flash. Izuku, seemingly sensing the attack moments before it took off, had used ethereal haunt. He appeared behind the beast, and used his still good foot to deliver an attack to the knee. It went down as Izuku tried to jump away. He was a little too late. Her mana dropped to almost zero, and she fell. She was caught before she hit the ground, but both she and her savior were sent flying backward as the attack hit. Achoo! All Might groaned as his headache wreaked havoc on his head. Even sick, he was fulfilling his duty as a teacher and grading his students. It was particularly difficult for him to grade non-combative students. One such student, Hitoshi, finished almost every fight with a single word. The smarter students kept their mouths shut and beat him down easily. Another was Hagakure. If it was a stealth-based mission, she earned top marks. If it wasn't, she was no more than a distraction. He leaned back into his couch and sighed, maybe I should train them in some sort of martial arts. They could use the experience, and the ability to defend themselves. Ring, ring. He looked at his phone, laying on the couch. Flipping it over, he checked the name. Nezu. With a cough, he picked it up and answered. Hello, All Might. USJ now. It's under attack. He activated the flames of One for All and crashed through his apartment's wall. I'm 3 minutes away. Status. No clue. All communications are down as far as we can tell. The only reason we know is because one of the top 3 flew up to my window. Miss Kendo and Mr. Ojiro are currently on their way to the hospital. There was supposedly a portal left in the parking lot. We're assuming it was Miss Hale, but it wasn't there when one of the teachers ran for it. We're on our way via cars. Got it. He was about to hang up, when Nezu added something else. All Might. He paused for a second. Protect our students, please. His voice was pleading. He felt the flames of One for All ignite even further. I will be there. He hung up. As he rounded a hilltop, he saw clouds condensing into a single massive storm. After a brief pause, little over 500 lightning bolts struck at once. He was assuming the force of the attack had caused the accompanying rain to go upward. Though, that might be just his eyes. I'll be there, kids, I promise. The next building he landed on was left missing a piece of cement as he kicked off harder. Izuku was sent flying forward as his back received a part of the attack. His vision went white, and before he flew into the wall, he was picked up by water. Instead of the wall, he was sent upward and reached a height exceeding the remaining bit of the dome. Sylph's blessing. His fall was slowed till he was slowly floating downward. Thanks. Yes. No problem. He turned to the epicenter of the attack. The ground was covered in a thin layer of water and smoking. Small sparks were jumping every now and then, giving a dangerous look to the water. The Nomu's destroyed corpse was skewered on a pole, which was releasing electricity every so often. 10. Izuku turned to see Bakugo, still fighting the flying villain, breathing heavily and soaked. He needs help. Hermes' blessing. He launched himself at the villain with air step. Detroit smash. The punch sent the man flying into a nearby wall and knocked him unconscious. His momentum grabbed him and he got up. Bakugo gazed at him with a look of rage plastered on his face and white eyes. He remained silent. Bakugo. Nothing has changed. Izuku caught his friend as he started to fall forward and rushed forward a little before lowering him back down. Izuku turned abruptly to see Shimura emerge from a portal, saying, I see you're still alive. I guess we go to Plan B. At that, Izuku's heartbeat increased, but it then slightly decreased when he noticed one of Aki's portals open beneath Bakugo. Plan B. Kurogiri. Do you mind? After leaving through one portal, the smoke villain opened another. As you wish. He waved his hand to open a second portal. In a single word, she encapsulated everything he was thinking. Fuck. Another Nomu emerged from the portal. He discovered that this thing was more powerful than the others by using Observe. These things must be created. They are not natural in the slightest. Agreed. She hesitated for a moment. Izuku. Yes, I want you to know that you are my best friend no matter what. Though he was unable to resist the urge, he could feel the sentiment in her words. Your only friend is me. Stop talking. The moment was ruined by you. He grinned and said, what time? I will live long after this incident. He turned to face the 3 villains and said, this is a stepping stone. He slammed his fists together and said, you got one. Don't you dare come near my friends and classmates. If it's a fight you want. He grinned at him and said, Nomu, kill the kid. Shimura laughed and said, you're one hell of a mini-boss. Mana shield. He was spared, but the shield broke. Gauges. Yellow. Red, red. He sighed in his head as he narrowly avoided another blow. It's going to have to do. He counterattacked, punching the elbow. He chose to use an unproven strategy because his attack lacked the raw power necessary to cause any harm. Using his quirk, he rolled down the Nomu's arm length. Fire branding. Curling his arm, a snake of fire blasted out in the direction of the monster. He leapt up and away from it, elongating the snake with his mind's eye. He caused it to ignite itself and take on multiple shapes with its long body. Its flesh was scarred by the intense heat. Not bad, but you must give them power. He disregarded what she had to say. All we have to do is buy time. Aki is most likely now out of mana. The instructors ought to be arriving soon. How on earth will we stall? Your mana and HP are nearly depleted. He leapt off a air step and flew at the Nomu, saying, if you don't think of something, we're going to die. It's a dumb idea. I enjoy it. The corner of his mouth curled into a smile. He spun around the Nomu using his gravity as he got closer. He leapt to his feet, casting a lightning spell into its back. The Nomu was stabbed through the chest by a huge spike of ice that raced between his feet. He sprang for its arm and powered the runes, making the most of the brief registration period. Mana shield. The blue aura absorbed the ensuing blow and threw him flying. A mound of snow ensnared him, triggering some memories. Todoroki had emerged from the enormous ice dome, followed closely by Suyu and Hagakure. Hagakure obeyed his command and carried a rather frail-looking Suyu in the direction of a hiding place. Run. Leave this to us. You good? He asked, turning to face Izuku. His mana had dropped below 100 after powering the runes, and his HP was in the 400s. He grinned and gestured with his hand, saying, so. I'm running on fumes and this thing is ridiculous. Since it was still in the yellow, only his stamina was useful. His classmate attacked right away after spotting the three villains. The land in front of them was covered by a huge glacier that rose out of the earth. Blinking, Izuku said, yeah, that works, thanks. Todoroki hummed as he nodded. The ice gave a heavy vibration. Looks like we don't have much time. Both turned to see the nude man standing a few meters away and said, I'd say. When no other person spoke, he went on. I may have an idea. Hi, who are you? While some of the students nodded in agreement, others started to ask questions. Name's Hale. I'm a friend of Midoriya's. Holding up a hand, she said, please stop. I need to go help them. Glasses took charge of the situation and said, everyone. Let's leave her alone for now. Once we all make it out of this mess, we'll have more time. She accessed her sister's inventory through a portal and started searching. She took out a mana elixir and drank it. She started using spells on the nearby students as she observed her mana replenishing. There's no need to waste extra. There are just 3 left. Glass's arms and chest were covered in enormous gouges. Emergency assistance. She walked to the next student, saying, at this time, there is nothing I can do for the missing HP. He was a rather big man with a very blocky face, covered in burns, and had glass shredded all over his legs. The bird guy came next. He appeared exhausted but not physically injured. She didn't bother him. Mask was caring for his missing arms. She thought he would eventually grow them back, but it must have been painful. To promote their growth, she cast a spell. Hunched over in a corner, Mr. Sparkle appeared to be fighting the urge to vomit. She saw no other injuries, aside from that. On the ground, a girl with enormous breasts was letting out a bothersome, incomprehensible cry. She put her to bed. The hand grenade had severe bruises all over his body and was unconscious. His hands were broken and his arms were sliced. It took him multiple spells to recover. She turned to see a girl wearing a skin-tight, torn-up outfit. Yeah. Our teachers need help. She followed the girl despite raising an eyebrow. She discovered the mangled bodies of 2 teachers as she rounded into the only area of the hideout that was somewhat roped off. The devastation of Mr. Aizawa's body made her think of the times they would go overboard and become incapacitated. She developed a newfound respect for him because of the fact that a man who had to worry about his body was in this condition. She could treat his wounds and those of the other teacher, who appeared to have fallen apart, but she would have to remain here. While she was tending to Grenade's wounds, the elixir ran out, and in contrast to Midoriya's spell, emergency aid cost her a lot more, 600 mana, to be exact. She only had a 20% affinity for spells that used light. Her specialty was water and air spells. Sei possessed both life and necromancy spells. Izuku, she sighed to herself as she started to recover. Don't pass away. Are you ready, child? Cat felt nervous. Strange. Yes, I do hope that this buys some time. It will if it works. Hopefully, it will work. He saw hundreds of sheets of ice shoot up from the ground as the Nomu carved its way through the remaining ice. They were so shiny that you could see your reflection in them, and they were about 13 centimeters thick. Now, he ran in the direction of the monster. It was just staring at the mirrors, which broke its line of sight. Using his bone blade, he ran counterclockwise, trying to get as far away as he could without it noticing. The Nomu began attacking someone or something. Tagata, the older student, was supposed to divert attention while Izuku tried to launch a surprise attack. Todoroki was on support, aside from the mirrors, which served as both a distraction and a cover. He saw Tagata delivering a haymaker to the creature's face after phasing through a punch. When the Nomu slammed into the ground, it shook violently, and he was nearly halfway there. Tagata continued to fight even though more than a few of the mirrors broke. Hurry! He had to leap out of the way as a black portal appeared in front of his path. He threw a ball of fire back through the portal, breaking his cover. He rushed in the direction of the Nomu with an air step. All right, kid, you still have a chance even though the plan was ruined. Prepare yourself. Holding an open palm forward, he withdrew his blade in one hand. The Nomu took his blow well, despite Tagata's attempt to buy him a moment. He thanked all the gods of luck as it swung to try to hit him because he was spared the trouble of trying to catch the attack. The borrowed quirk began to work, and he felt the thing's fist pass through him. He stopped the quirk when the attack was fully phased through. He swung and triggered the runes, taking a chance. His blade halted after cutting to the spine. At that moment, Todoroki sent a spike of ice through the Nomu. His blade burst with necrotic energy, and the runes activated before its body had a chance to recover. He had targeted its regeneration quirk with a slowing rune. He saw him just before the end of the attack. Then he and the Nomu were wrapped in ice. He completed his portion of the plan. With Tsuyu still recovering, Hagakure watched the battle with hope and fear. She wished to protect others from harm. She experienced a range of emotions as she watched their attack. Anxiety was the starting point, followed by excitement, fear, and finally overwhelming joy. The corners of her eyes were watering. All Might. When she saw the expression on his face, her joy turned to fear. His eyes gave off the impression that he was prepared to kill or destroy, and his normally constant smile was frozen in a deep frown. He had reached the top of the stairs and was descending them slowly. Even though he was in pajamas, his terrifying presence persisted. Tagata, he asked in a cold, angry voice. Yes sir. The nude man appeared frightened. Get my students out of here. I'll get Midoriya. Yes sir, he said, saluting and pacing the floor. Todoroki and he ran toward her and Tsuyu after he appeared beside her. It's time to leave. We'll go to the other students. After Tagata picked up Tsuyu, the four of them fled in the direction of the destroyed city. Dash. From the top of the ice glacier came a voice. The child grinned as he surveyed his appearance and said, well, it looks like you finally appeared. What took you so long, All Might? You appear to have been sleeping. That might make you a tad more angrier than I was planning. He sighed. Oh well, Lady Mortis, do you mind? A woman emerged through a portal. She had a big scalpel in her hand and was dressed in a blood-red nurse's uniform. She had jet black hair and a slight smile on her face. From the bag at her hip, she took something and tossed it against the wall. All Might's eyes turned red. An arm. Zero was the only person who could have it. He launched the attack right away. He punched the girl after moving quickly enough to displace the air behind him. He had to jump through a portal that opened beneath them before he could continue on to the others. The portal closed after the three passed through. No, he slammed his fist down on the ice. It broke almost immediately, and he fell. His rage turned to being stuck in ice with his protege as he landed. As the ice melted, his vision became hazy. Never again. He was forced to agree. Some distance away, All Might had lifted him up and placed him on his feet. Are you okay, my boy? He called forth a small fire to melt the last of the ice and nodded, saying, as long as I don't have to fight anymore, I'll be good. He said, that thing has multiple quirks. Super strength, shock absorption, and regeneration of some sort. He left out the details of its stats because All Might wouldn't understand them. All Might nodded and said, get clear, boy. I'll handle this. They both watched as the monster's head began to reattach itself as he began to backpedal. Already, the hole in its chest was nearly closed. All Might was on it before it could completely reform. After taking the initial blow, it collided with a big piece of ice. His hero began driving it deeper into the earth. The ice against which it was pushed broke and cracked. But All Might persisted, punching it into the ground until the ground gave way. He continued even after its body began to repair the damage. The Nomu began to be buried deeper and deeper with each punch, which sent a shock wave of air pressure. This continued for a few minutes. It frightened him to think that All Might was expressing his rage. Only when the other teachers showed up and All Might stood did it end. His hands were bloody and his face was beaded with perspiration. The Nomu's body was attempting to mend, but it appeared that the damage was too great. Izuku followed All Might as he walked back up the stairs and spoke to the teachers, refusing to turn to smile. He remained a few meters behind, allowing All Might the room he required. That was cruel. Yes, I have never witnessed All Might so enraged. Izuku, yes, we survived. He suppressed a small smile that he felt, saying, yeah. Then he turned to Nezu and asked, Midoriya. Yeah, you're naked. Glancing down, he verified that he was wearing his birthday suit. Yeah, my outfit burned to ash during an attack. Go get clothes on and come back immediately. We have a lot to talk about. Izuku didn't argue because she could see the rage in his eyes. He went to the changing area and put on his school uniform once more. Some of the other pupils were being led up the stairs as he made his way back. EMTs were walking up with Momo, Bakugo, and both teachers on stretchers. A second later, Aki joined him. She hugged him and handed him a message. Have you heard? What? Zero suffered severe injuries. The damage is severe, but he will survive. When he returned with the 3 students, Tagata found him. Based on what he could locate. According to Tagata, he battled 2 evildoers. However, one of them was completely burned and had big pieces of flesh missing. By the time he arrived, the other villain had left. Izuku heard his heartbeat but did not reply. Kid, you must relax. After she finished, she slapped him, saying, there's no one to fight right now. Don't you dare go running off into danger again. I barely rescued your ass as it is. If you get into danger again, you're on your own. My dad is going to ground me for life after today. As he gave her another hug, his heartbeat slowed. Fine. Go home or back to school. I'll see you later. She opened a portal for herself and nodded. It closed as she passed through, saying, bye. With his constant sulky smile, Nezu waved him over, saying, Midoriya. Would you come here please? As Izuku crossed the pavilion, he saw more students being escorted across. Sato, Kaminari, and Kirishima appeared healthy but worn out. They trudged past the ruined area, all 3 leaning on one another. Yes sir. He started to leave the crowd and said, walk with me. After that, Izuku observed the teachers' faces. While the majority appeared dejected, there was a rage in them that reminded him of their authority. Nezu came to a halt at a section of the balcony overlooking Todoroki's ice dome. He turned to face him, and his glare set off Gamer's mind. Who did this? Whoa, his name is Tenko Shimura. He seemed to be the ringleader. They were using some sort of test tube villains called Nomu. On their stat page it called one number 52. The others were numbers 41 and 87. I'm assuming there are more than that though. He bowed and gave a nod. Thank you, and I'm sorry you had to go through that. Please forgive your principal. Izuku was uneasy. It's no worries sir. I'm just glad everyone, mostly, came out okay. Nezu nodded and straightened up. Things could have been much worse. I'm glad it didn't though. We have Miss Hale to thank for that though. She saved both teachers' lives instead of trying to help you 3. If you will extend my thanks to her. He nodded. I will sir. Was there anything else? One last question. A rather important one if I'm honest. Did you kill? His heart almost stopped. Lying is pointless, child. It was you, as evidenced by the burned bodies. He nodded and sighed. Yes sir. It was either us or them and I made my decision. Nezu also sighed. I thought as much. You won't be punished for their deaths, but you will have to give multiple statements to the police. Each was either self-defense or in the defense of a person who couldn't help themselves. Correct. He said with a nod. Yes sir. He began to make his way back to the main entrance, saying, all right then. We will speak to the police now. We are currently looking for Miss Ashido and Jiro. Do you happen to know their whereabouts? No sir. Everyone was teleported somewhere different. I was attacked almost from the start by one of the Nomu. Nezu glanced across the USJ and hummed. Izuku looked after him. The scenery had drastically changed. The ship in the lake area had pieces missing, the landslide area was destroyed, and the ice dome was not included. Several of the ruined buildings had collapsed, and the fire dome was completely destroyed. But the pavilion suffered the most damage. The surface was splattered with craters, cement fragments, fire, ice, and lightning. Over the Nomu, he could see All Might standing and ensuring it remained down. Sir, yes, what happens now? Nezu let out a sigh. I'm not sure at this moment. All I know is school is cancelled for the next week. Any other decision will be made later. A kid, yes, there is something I have been keeping from you. I kept it hidden because I didn't want you to freak out or worry about it. What? For him, she opened a notification window. A brand new quest. The USJ Siege. USJ has been attacked by villains who are prepared to fight. Stay alive and save your classmates. Bonus goal number 1. Complete a Nomu. Bonus goal number 2. Every student needs to make it through the assault. Reward. The quest is finished. The USJ Siege. You have survived long enough to be saved, and you have repelled the villains for as long as possible. Bonus goals 1 and 2. Accomplished. 250,000 XP as the reward. Bonus rewards include 10 skill coins and a skill book. The coins appeared and he put them in his pocket as he swiped the alerts away. The book turned blue, but more alerts appeared before he could use Observe. XP debt paid off. Gamer, congratulations. You have advanced to level 22 after gaining several levels. The following is what you have gained. 10 extra stat points. 1 point of quality. XP at the moment. 736,547 837,395. We succeeded. Cat joined him in cheering. Look at the book. Note, a lost skill tree book has been located. The Viking Berserker skills from the lost class are included in this book. Would you like this skill tree to be unlocked? His eyes grew wide. A tree of skills. For him, Cat clicked, yes, and the book vanished. There was a new prompt. There is now a new skill tree. Beginning ability. Line in the sand level. 1 experience, 0.00%. Leave your mark and keep it there. Until your last breath, you will hold the line with your body, mind, and will all working together. You are the first and only line of defense, so stand tall, warrior. Following the death of the last user during the Battle of Stamford, this skill was no longer available. Gain the following when active. Maximum HP, 10%. Maximum mana, 10%. Maximum stamina, 10%. You can't go more than 1 meter from the chosen location. The active cost. Cost of stamina, 100 per second. A skill tree starts with this ability. To access the next skill, you must reach level 10. Holy shit, Cat's enthusiasm began to rise sharply. Cat sent Aki a message to see if she knew anything. She didn't respond, but a minute later, he received a response. I apologize, that's the first time my mother has ever brought it up. Kid, we need to get to work. What did you do? What was that spear the other day? A spell. Our spells have never needed incantations. What made that one different? He said, settling into his desk chair. She forced a smile. It was a stronger than normal spell. Without a word, she gazed down at her feet and asked, I can tell that, but why was it stronger? He continued with a sigh. Look, I'm just curious. You killed that thing in a single strike. I'm pretty happy I lived through that, but I'd like to know how you had so much power hidden up your sleeve. She looked up at him and said, I can only do it once. That's a start. Why? What is it? She extended her hands into a bowl and held up a finger. I call on the storm and sea. A tiny cloud hung over her hands, and water poured out of a tiny ripple in the sky. Little bursts of lightning began to fall from the cloud. I'm a herald of Susano. The water evaporated and the cloud vanished, too. Herald. Pulling her knees to her chest, she took a seat on his bed. It was an accident. I was only 4 when it happened. 2 years ago, I was messing around with spells trying to make new ones. I was following along with Mom's idea and was using the names of gods. Mom didn't bother telling us at the time or forgot, but Japanese gods want back into the world. Anyone who uses their name in an actual spell is considered a herald by them. What do you do as a herald? Until I'm 18, nothing. What happens then? I'm not sure. Susano started to explain, but was cut off by Mom. She argued with him saying it was a mistake but he wasn't having it. She challenged him to a fight over my freedom. Masaki burst out laughing. Wait. Cat fought a god. Aki smiled slightly. Tried. She got her butt handed to her. She was able to get a single hit in though. Susanoo rewarded her by extending my initiation date to my 18th birthday. She hummed and buried her face in her knees, saying, "That's kind of terrifying. Does he just let you use his spells freely now?" Aki's knees moved in tandem with her head shake. "All spells I cast with his name take up all but 1 mana. They have a minimum, but no max. I can do small things, like the small ocean storm, without using too much." Izuku's mind started considering the ramifications of this right away. Do other heralds exist? What is desired by the gods? What about the Greek or Norse gods? Why only the Japanese gods? Kid, keep quiet. You know, I'm trying to think too. I apologize. Why is it just the Japanese gods? She collapsed onto his bed, sprawled out on her back. No idea. Mom said it was something to do with doomsday or something. The world is going to end, he exclaimed as he leapt around. Then a bolt of lightning struck him. She sat up and looked at him, saying, "No, you idiot. The end of their worlds. Did you ever read up on Greek or Japanese mythology?" He rubbed the mark off his forehead and sat back down. "No, why would I?" She gave him another zap. "Izuku, you pissed off the goddess of the sun. Why wouldn't you read up on it?" "I was busy." Zap sighed and started to explain, saying, "No excuses. Greek mythology itself doesn't have a true doomsday, but their own world does. A great force shall descend on Olympus. With a hunger so great even the marble shall be consumed. Standing with their children, the gods must face their end. All the Greek gods stay on Olympus to be prepared to fight this threat." Huh, what does Ares look like, I wonder? For us, what would Aphrodite look like? Isn't she the embodiment of your greatest desire? Ignoring Masaki's digressions, Aki went on. The Norse gods have Ragnarok, most of them are supposed to die during it. So they're preparing their armies. She exhaled. The Japanese gods though, their world doesn't meet an end. Their bloodline is said to be alive to this day. They use heralds as a foothold in this world. Mom said they were imprisoned by some other force a long time ago. And before you ask, I have no clue how she knew that. So what's the point of having a foothold if they're stuck where they are? Mom didn't know. She had a guess that it had something to do with their spells. The more spells used with their name, the more they can push themselves into this world. That made him stop thinking. What do you mean? Can other people cast spells? Seriously, did you think villains were the only bad thing in this world? He asked, and she arched an eyebrow. Masaki snorted. She's got a point. I guess I never gave it much thought. Maybe we should talk about it later. Are there other heralds? She sighed. I assume there is, mainly because Susanoo told me that I'd be defending myself from the other gods. Being able to battle the messengers of other gods sounds like a lot of fun, so I'm all for it. No, why? Unless you defeat them in a challenge, it seems like a contract that can never be broken. She fell silent. Also, could you really be under someone else's thumb? She asked. Dude, you're correct. Ignore that. How are things going for everyone? What? He asked, blinking back to Aki. Your teachers and fellow students. How are they? First, a question. Yes. How did you find out about all this stuff about God? We ended up meeting a goddess during our dimension hopping, she said with a smile. Meth was her name, and she and her mother got into a drinking contest that ended in a draw. She introduced us to Un after telling us about the Greek gods, but she was a lot of fun. After being abandoned on Earth, they reportedly became drinking partners. She responded to his perplexed look by saying, she's a daughter of Aegir. In Norse mythology, he is a god of water and also hosts many of their parties. He thought he should read up on them since they were real and not just some strange, powerful woman. How are they doing now? Mr. Thanks to you, Ms. 13 and Aizawa are in almost perfect health. They are confined to bed rest at the moment. Zero was the only student to sustain any physical harm. His parents are not letting him return to UA. That really stinks. But aside from that, all of the trauma is psychological. As far as I could tell, a number of the students either directly or indirectly killed people. Jiro and Momo were the two most impacted. Since USJ, Jiro has not spoken to anyone, and Momo has been hiding in her home and refusing to respond to inquiries. Well, that's not too bad. It might be considerably worse. Are the two people I sent for assistance doing okay? Kendo's hands have fully healed since I visited her. and Ojiro is doing well, he said, nodding. They were sparring on hospital property when I last saw them. They appeared a little irritated that they were so easily defeated. How about you? Grasped until high school, she moaned as she fell backward. Even if I didn't nearly die, he wasn't happy about what had happened. She sat back up. What had happened with the police? Following USJ. Izuku was sitting by himself, playing mental I Spy with Cat. It was difficult for both of them to cheat, but it was better than sitting around bored when a man without any distinguishable features entered the police interrogation room. Name: Naomasa Tsukauchi. Title: The Secret Keeper. 36 years old. Level: 29. Truth rank: D is the Quirk. His int, Wis, and Cha were significantly higher than his own, but his physical stats weren't particularly impressive when compared to a student or professional. Mr. Midoriya, he said with a nod. That's correct. I'm glad to meet you, the detective said, holding out his hand. You can call me Tsukauchi. He took a seat in the chair across from the table and started by opening a folder. Now, please respond honestly to the following questions I have for you. He said with a nod. Yes, sir. What's your name? Midoriya Izuku. Badass Cat, he said with a smile, or should it be a real name? When is your birthday? July 15th. Cat Midoriya. How old? 15. But that feels a little rude to Shino. 4 months on the magic side and nearly a year on the earth side. Thank you. He turned the page and took out his notepad. Now, how did the assault begin? It was quite near the beginning. We had just begun descending the main staircase, and I was no longer able to message specific individuals. I cautioned the other students and teachers. The villains emerged during our evacuation. We headed out, and Mr. Aizawa leapt down to confront them. Some unidentified force attacked 13 as we reached the top of the stairs. I jumped as portals started to open all around us. The others were forced into portals while I was in the air. What if the names were combined? Would it sound like Midoriya Masaki? Cat, really? He asked his next question after he had finished writing down a few points. You were the first to fight the Nomu, right? Yes, sir. Tenko gave me the order to kill and set the Nomu on me. Yeah, I do enjoy it. Call me Masaki. How did you find out the name of the leader? My ability to read people's information is one of my peculiarities. Their name, age, quirks, and a point-based power structure are all included in this. I don't call you Masaki. That gives the impression that you're our kid. As he jotted down something, he hummed, that sounds pretty helpful. You must have used it on me. He smiled as Izuku nodded. Watanabe Guro is the name. Do you know it? Zombie. Technically, I am, too. Zombie is his peculiarity. Izuku sighed. He was fighting Bakugo Katsuki, and Tsukauchi nodded. I was still fighting Nomu at the time, and he didn't let up at all. I apologize for what I did, but he forced my hand and put himself in my shoes. How are you doing, our kid? He nodded once more. He is suing UA and wants to file charges. His case will most likely be dismissed after being ridiculed. I just wanted to let you know. The goal of every villain there was to murder children. After writing a few more lines, he posed another query. What happened when the ceiling collapsed? Any jury or judge will not be pleased with them. I was dropped by the Nomu, who went to protect Tenko, and went on the offensive against the villains holding my classmates captive. It fits because you got the perk from her, and I wouldn't be here without her. I was told you ripped the arms off of one and threw another on top of another to protect them. Koda, he nodded. At the moment, I had no other trustworthy means of saving him, Uraraka, Mr. Aizawa, and myself. So I took the necessary action. Regarding the arms, the glass struck us in less than a second. Please, Cat, he turned to the following page. What about the Nomus? I used a lightning spell to kill one and my solar flare to kill the other. The last one was handled by All Might. Although Todoroki, Tagata, and I battled it, we were unable to handle it on our own. Cat, why did you kill during the attack when you could have defeated your assailants? He could tell it wasn't an accusation but rather a valid question. When I could, I subdued, but the Nomus gave us no other option. Regarding the other bad guys, I didn't intend for it to occur. I assumed the person obstructing our signal was the villain perched atop the USJ. That was all I knew. I hurled Bakugo in the direction of the roof, where he engaged in combat with a flying villain. He obeyed my order and brought down the roof after a short altercation. I knew we needed help, but I didn't consider what might happen next. Cat, Have you spoken to any of the other students? He asked as the detective completed taking notes. Not just yet. We don't want to push those who are still in the process of recovering mentally. Why are you asking? Please let them know that I accept responsibility as their class president if they are experiencing grief. I don't want them to think they are monsters for what they did, even though nobody should be held responsible for what transpired. They didn't fight for anything else but for their friends and their own survival. I swear, Cat, I can do that, he nodded. The final query, how were the two students transported to UA? Masaki, he sighed. Hello. Also, damn, they really don't remember her. Aki had told him to take credit for everything she did and had messaged them about applying an invisible rune of some kind to her forehead to make everyone forget her. Portals. Although I can open and close them, there isn't much time between them or for them to remain open. Only Tagata managed to survive because of this. He wrote something down and nodded, saying, I appreciate you being honest. He got up and left the room, saying, someone will be by to drop you off at home in about a minute. A week after USJ. Having made the decision to walk the entire distance to school, the two of them set out early and were now walking the last portion. Is it possible for Kamui to communicate with trees? Talk to? Probably not, he hummed, but he might be able to sense their needs. If a tree could talk, how do you think it would sound? Probably like an old man. It would probably have some sort of speech problem and be really slow speaking. Do you believe Kamui and Lady are together? Yes, according to the forums, but I doubt it. They don't seem to mesh that well. How about you? Are you fond of anyone? You should already be aware of that, he said, raising an eyebrow. Actually saying it aloud makes it more enjoyable. Midoriya, he had to suppress his instinct to avoid their tackle when he turned to see Kendo and Uraraka running up the hill. Pass the resistance check. Maybe we should get into more life-threatening situations, he said as he waited for them to release him. No, that was already awful. I couldn't think of anything worse. After a minute, they released them, and Kendo said, how are you? Honestly, he replied, with them following him. He was bored. He had been honing his existing skills and learning a few new ones over the past week. Have you heard the news? Uraraka had sprinted over to stand next to him. Masaki, no idea, no. I tried to stay away from forums where people discuss TV because I don't really watch it anymore. A manhunt is currently underway. Every UA alumnus is armed and on the hunt for the League of Villains. That's kind of scary, he whistled. Did they describe the events of the attack? Replied Kendo, the news stations are saying we defended ourselves as best we could and are pinning any deaths on the roof collapsing. Not far from the truth. Ideas? He saw Uraraka ask, turning back to face Kendo with a worried expression. I don't understand girls as well as you do, kid. Midoriya, Uraraka's voice sounded low. Yes. Are you satisfied with what you did? What are you saying? All right. Jiro and Momo continue to refuse to take calls or texts. We wanted to know how you were doing. We've heard that the guys are handling it well, but they're a bit harsher than usual. In actuality, I'm totally okay with what transpired. Only one of our classmates is unable to return, and all of them survived the attack. Overall, I consider that a success. You don't mind that you killed, then? Fear. Her suggestion seemed strange but not incorrect. He looked at her, who had a hint of something he didn't recognize and worry written on her face. Sighing, he clarified, don't misunderstand. Although I regret having to kill, I had to do what I had to do to ensure everyone's survival. If I could go back and change the process, I would try to preserve the result. I simply don't feel sorry for those who wish to murder children. I'm not a monster. Kendo broke the silence by punching him in the shoulder, saying, aside from one thing, I agree with what you said. I am no a kid. She slapped him in the back of the head after flicking him with an enlarged finger at each syllable until she reached her thumb. I guess that's the wrong word to use. Masaki began to laugh, then felt weightless and was picked up by the shirt. He fell forward and was forced into an uphill roll, so he just fell. He laid his face in the ground and sighed. You know, I'm kind of embarrassed for you. Why? He asked, glancing at Kendo. He turned to face the girl, who had turned red from face to ear tips, and said, Uraraka says you were stark naked after your little light show. Taking a deep breath, he shrugged and said, I burned off my clothes, not much I can do about that. Every teacher also noticed you. Be cautious because I believe midnight may give you some amusing looks. Operation Rabbit's Foot, he asked, thinking about it and agreeing. Is that what you're calling it? He snorted. She blew a raspberry at him, saying, I get to call my spell combos whatever I want. When they found out a few days ago that Misaki could cast and hold a spell without it expiring, they decided that the best way to use this was to have Hermes' Blessing and Sylph's Blessing on standby. During this time, the timer went on cooldown, allowing her to cast another spell, but no more than that. He grinned and said, I'll be sure to run. They arrived at the classroom entrance approximately 30 minutes ahead of schedule, expecting to be the first students in class, but the majority of their classmates were there, chatting quietly, including the typically unfocused ones. The only students who were absent were Momo, Jiro, Bakugo, Todoroki, and Ashido, and when they saw him, everyone gradually fell silent. What the devil is happening? Beats me, she shrugged, and he could feel it. They wish to ask something of you, Iida said in a low voice as he got up and walked over to him. She knew. Kendo grinned back at him after the girls passed him and sat down, and he raised an eyebrow without receiving any further explanation. He got a mental kick and a headache. Thanks, Misaki, couldn't tell. Why? You're cruel. With his headache getting worse, he made his way to the front of the room and said, I've heard that you all want to ask me a question. A few held up their hands, but no one spoke. Ojiro. He was the one who knew him the best. I want to ask you to practice sparring. I think I speak for Kendo, too. He turned to face her again and got a nod. What? Why? He wasn't going to refuse, but he couldn't figure out why. Dude, most of us either fought a bunch of unprepared small fries or people we had no chance of defeating, Kirishima interjected. The only people who can compete with the villains and prevail are you, Bakugo, and Todoroki. With a sigh, he said to them, I see. Does anyone else want spar training exclusively? Misaki, Ojiro, Kendo, Iida, Sato, and Shoji raised their hands. Got it, she said with a popping sound. Asui, so, what do you want? Not Asui, but Suyu. I'd like to strengthen myself. However, sparring won't help, in my opinion. He nodded, thinking, you might be right. The door opened to reveal a weary-looking Jiro and a dejected Ashido. She doesn't look great, he said. They don't both. I'll do my best to assist both, but let's start with this. Do you know how to handle this quickly? Questionnaire. That could be effective. When I can, I'm ready to assist. I'll come up with something if you write down what you want to get better on a piece of paper. If I explain the situation, I'm sure I can also get a teacher or two to assist. After the 10-minute warning bell, Iida stood up and began gathering papers for him, but he only got a few nods before most people pulled out a piece of paper and began filling it out. I like him. Misaki, he is not a slave. Are you sure? Yes, without a doubt. He accepted the papers and said, thank you, Iida. He was nodded and addressed the class, saying, I'll review them and hopefully have a plan for each of you by tomorrow. He went to his seat, pulled out his hole punch, and, if each paper didn't already have 2 holes in it, he picked up 2 rings and joined them. Observe. Wishes for Class 1A training. The majority of Class 1A's training needs and desires are covered in this badly written book. Would you like to have this book in your collection? He received a few curious looks, but the majority of his classmates had already seen the trick when she chose, yes, for him, and the book turned into vibrant specks of light. Is there anything intriguing? Shoji wants to learn how to deal with flying enemies. Birdman wants to gain more control over Dark Shadow and be able to fight in melee. Misaki hummed, hearing the sound of pages turning. Shoji's will be easy, but how would we help Tokiyami? He said, closing his eyes and concentrating on her. Hail, Aki. No, you fool, Hitoshi, her father, has ward. But he has no control over it. The class start melody cut them off in the middle of their conversation. No, but he can aim and fire. Teach that to the kid and he can work on control later. When he walked to the front of the room, Mr. Aizawa bowed to the students, and several of them had very perplexed expressions on their faces. He didn't appear particularly disturbed, but he was clearly angry. I want to say something since this is the first time I've addressed you all as a group. I apologize. I apologize for the sacrifices that some of you had to make, as they will be with you forever. I apologize for not being able to protect everyone. Misaki. Yes. She hesitated for a moment, then said, go for it. He had something ready in case this occurred. I personally don't accept your apology. Mr. Aizawa stood erect and gave him a look that was a mix of confusion and glare. I personally think a proper apology would be to push us harder, he said, speaking loudly enough for everyone to hear. We are not civilians, we are heroes in training. Your apology may work well for public relations and television, but it is insufficient for the students you are teaching. I believe I speak for the majority of us when I say that your apology should be intended to help us deal with the future, particularly if something similar is likely to occur again. Hiroshima got up and said, I concur. I never blamed you for what transpired at USJ, and I never will. We would have survived while you repelled a small army if it weren't for the mist villain. You exerted every effort possible. Kendo and Iida stood next to each other. Iida said, I can't help but agree, even though I would have phrased it more tactfully than our class president. You stood up for us this time, but even though we are students, it is our time to show that we are heroes. Kendo continued, you are a teacher, so I don't expect you to be a babysitter. Instead of hiding behind you, you should teach us how to protect civilians and ourselves. 30 seconds left. He saw Mr. Aizawa's eyes widen a little as the majority of the students began to shout their agreement. So Mr. Aizawa, his teacher turned to face him as the others fell silent. Will you teach us how to defend ourselves? You're screwed. Seeing his teacher smile, he could only smirk. Time's out. Midoriya, since you generously offered to lead this extracurricular activity, you will be in charge of it. I anticipate that each of them will oppose you for at least a minute. The sports festival is the deadline you have. Yeah, we're not going to have a lot of free time, he said, wearing a faint smile before nodding and sitting down. He could sense her excitement growing as he said, a minute. You have some work ahead of you. She went silent for a brief moment before saying, wait. This means we get to spend one-on-one time with the girls. He said. He groaned in his head, perv. He groaned, stale, and she mimicked it. The annual UA Sports Festival will take place in 4 weeks. Each of you has the chance to demonstrate your abilities and earn respect in the hero community. Pro agencies may make offers to you based on your performance. I'm sure I'll be impressed by all of you. Their teacher answered questions for the remainder of the class, and since he was unable to speak, he talked to Masaki about the training schedule he was creating. Aizawa called on him before the bell rang, saying, Midoriya, come with me. The bell rang as they entered, and the teachers who were there left them alone. He stood up and followed, and they went down the hall and into a small teacher's office. Thank you, and I'm sorry. For what purpose did he raise his hand and form his fire into letters? For assisting them in overcoming this obstacle. Additionally, I'm supposed to let you know that you won't be attending the sports festival. Lame, he said, nodding both in agreement with her and in comprehension. I assumed that I could likely win every competition with ease. The faculty was worried about that. Though it starts after the sports festival, you do have an offer. Really who? He asked, raising an eyebrow. Sleepy Seiwa. Sir Night-Eye. Aizawa nodded as his eyes grew wide. I take it you know the name. He was All Might's sidekick, and he nodded. He is also the mentor for the older student who assisted you at USJ, he said, nodding. I think Tagata was the one who gave him your name. You think he's going to be nude too? Whistled Masaki. I have a few questions regarding the training, and I will make sure to thank him. Like, can I do it using UA facilities? I'll make plans by tomorrow. It will take place every day after school if it is approved. That would be very helpful, he said, nodding. Do you have any ideas that have symbolic meaning? A couple will be challenging for the majority. If you need help, I'm willing to offer assistance. Thank you, sir. Last thing I wanted to talk about is the missing seat. How is Zero doing? He's depressed and angry. As a small gesture of contrition, UA's support teachers are building him a bionic arm after his parents pulled him out. Can I assist you with it? Power Loader is in charge of the project, so you'd have to ask him, he shrugged. Normally, he is free after school. Then I'll speak with him. Regarding the seat, a new student will be joining us. It's too early in the year to determine whether any have potential, but normally we would select from the General Studies program. Therefore, a foreign student who didn't make it at first will be accepted. Which country is it and what is their name? By the end of the week, I'll give you a folder containing fundamental information. You understand that I want you to keep their name in mind and help them out when necessary. Yes, sir, he said with a nod. Get back to class. Masaki, send a message to Aki asking for her help with training. Ask her to ask her dad for his help too. Tell him that there's a student with an entity similar to Ward, he said, leaving the room and heading back to class. KK. He took his phone out. Hello, if you're not too busy, I have a request. It took him a minute to get his response. Fire. Mr. Aizawa has asked me to train my classmates, and I have until the sports festival to make them fight me for at least a minute. I was wondering if any of you would be interested in helping. A thinking emoji was sent by her. We still have our hero responsibilities, but I'd be okay with it. If Hale can open a portal for you, I can ask her. Aki messaged him back before he received her response. If he's going, I'm fairly certain he'd be okay with me helping too, so I'll ask Dad. I'm sure it would be a first for him. Appreciative. Request. Correct. Could you please allow the Pussycats to assist by opening a portal? Of course. I'm grateful. However, you owe me. In what way? Food and a magic spar come to mind. Alright. Nice. When I speak with Dad, I'll send you a message. He returned his attention to his phone. Since we have no travel time, the best we can do is assist for 2 hours each day if she agrees. Yes, she replied. Please email me the location of the portal tomorrow. Your help is greatly appreciated, Mandalay. She sent an emoji of a puke. Too sweet. Masaki gave a snort. I'll see you tomorrow, haha. I'll prepare the costume for you, KK. Please don't. Mandalay. Alright, this is going to be a lot more fun now, Masaki said, beginning to laugh. I really hope the girls didn't modify it more than what it already was, he said with a sigh as he put his phone away and returned to class. He received a few curious looks as he sat down, but no one spoke. He acknowledged that point to her, saying, like what? You were already butt naked in front of several of the students. What could be more embarrassing than that? After school the following day. This is Mr. Hale, Tokiyami. He will assist you in attempting to manage Dark Shadow. Nice to meet you, said the older man, bowing. He smiled as he looked up. I've heard that you have a monster inside of you. Warg. Warg snarled at the child before him as a gray fog erupted from his body and transformed into a huge wolf. Show yourself, you runt. With a low whine, Dark Shadow emerged, but flinched behind his keeper, Tokiyami. Must we battle the menacing wolf? With a sigh, his classmate said, Dark Shadow, you must control yourself. We're going to spend some time training. Aki said, the arena is ready, Dad. As a portal opened and he emerged. When he turned to face Tokiyami, he grinned and rubbed her head, saying, thanks sweetie. He then said, come on kid, your training starts now. They both nodded, and the portal closed behind them. Will they be alright? The bird guy gets stronger in the dark, right? Aki hummed. Izuku said with a nod, that's what he said. So I don't know. She smiled as she finished the sentence. Masaki whined, I wanted to see them fight. Masaki, perhaps next time. But we also have to worry about the other students. She tapped him again, and the AI filled a part of his mind once more. He's right, Masaki. She slapped his hand, and he felt his mind clear. Yes, you promised her what? Grinning, Aki said, nothing. Masaki, go help your classmates and don't worry about it. He sighed and said, Aki, I take it you have the coordinates. Yup, she snapped her fingers. Resistance check failed. A few seconds passed. Lion. He had been lifted off his feet by Pix's embrace. Tiger slapped him on the back after he hugged her back and she dropped him, but he felt someone pull him into an embrace, so he used transference. Hey Pixie. Transfer completed. Hey Mandalay. She gave him a flash of yellow. I'm sorry we couldn't be there for you, she said, drawing him into a tighter embrace. Don't worry about it, I made it out alive, he said, reciprocating her hug. Do you know how worried I was? How can you tell me not to worry? Said the green as it blended with the yellow. There was nothing you could do, so don't be too hard on yourself about it. I guess you're right, she said, adding blue. She shoved him away, and all the colors changed to orange. Let's do this. I guess it's time to start, he said, observing the others and the amusement in the eyes of Ragdoll and Pixie as Aki entered the arena with Tiger trailing behind. What is the lesson plan? Pixie gave him a nudge. Red attacked him on 3 fronts as soon as he said, I actually think I figured out a plan for each of the students. Only 2 are missing, and they're the ones that willingly killed someone. He attempted to appease them by saying, I'm going to talk to them, I swear. I just didn't have time yesterday. I'm sorry, Lion, Pixie said with a sigh as she leaned on him. You don't know how eager we are to participate in the manhunt. Why don't you? He said as he approached and opened the door. Since rescue is our area of expertise, we are not permitted to assist with the operation. She shadow boxed the air as she entered, saying, which I disagree with, after sparring with you a ton, I think I could take a top 10. I can defeat you now, Pixie. With a hand gesture, she told him, you don't count. Why is that? He asked, raising an eyebrow. Because you cheat, everyone. These people are going to help me train you all. The young girl is a friend of mine, her name is Hale. The other 4, I'm sure would be more than happy to introduce themselves, he said, letting out a sigh as he addressed his classmates, who were standing in a big group. Actually, we're not ready. We're missing a member, said Mandalay, smiling as she looked at him. Shit, all right, give me a moment. He carried the bag Ragdoll had given him to the changing room. Midoriya returned a few minutes later, shrouded in a fog. Really, Aki, are you assisting? The young girl grinned and said, a kind woman asked me to keep your appearance a secret. How could I refuse? A few of her classmates burst out laughing. He looks so unhappy. Uraraka couldn't help but laugh as the mist cleared and a very familiar muscular body wearing a very fitting outfit was revealed. Midoriya, wearing a green version of the hero team's uniform, had the deadpan look on his face that she had never seen before. Lock on with these sparkling gazes, began the red-dressed woman. We've come to lend a paw and help, said the yellow woman next. Always ready to save you, said Midoriya. The large man after him said, coming out of nowhere. Stingingly cute and cat-like, said the woman with the blonde hair. Midoriya was kneeling in front of them as they all posed as one. Wild, pussycats. The majority of the students started to applaud and clap, while some started to laugh at Midoriya's face. All right, everyone, time to get started. Please take the folder with your name on it. Midoriya sighed and stood up, pointing to a small table against the wall before pointing to each individual in turn. This is Tiger, this is Pixie, this is Ragdoll, and this is Mandalay. A lesson plan and the names of the people you will be working with will be printed on your page. If you need help, don't hesitate to ask any of us. She picked up her folder from the table, opened it, and was a little disappointed that she didn't get Midoriya, but he didn't exactly fight in a way that she could imitate. Mandalay, the woman in red, was her trainer for the next 4 weeks. I wonder what the lady can do, she said, walking over and bowing. Nice to meet you, Ms. Mandalay. The training schedule seemed crazy, but she knew it would help her learn hand-to-hand combat and improve her speed and agility. Uraraka is my name. Nice to meet you, Uraraka. May I see your folder? Said a voice in her mind. Here you go, she's a telepath, she said, passing the folder to him. Excited, was the smile that returned to her face. She replied, I'm excited to be taught by a hero, especially if they're recommended by our class prez. Do you like him? He was a pretty great student. She flushed, saying, and no. I can read emotions, you know. That's not a topic you can hide from me, which is why you're practically glowing pink right now, Mandalay laughed. As Ashido joined them, she felt herself beginning to float, but before she could go very far, she was pulled back down to the ground. Hey now, I'm just teasing. She was drawn closer, and the voice became a whisper. If you do well each day, I'll send you a mental image of Midoriya each day. Her racing mind stopped and concentrated on the thought. That caught your attention. I'll give you a sneak peek. After a moment, she saw a picture of Izuku relaxing at a lake, his body blurred out. The woman was saluted, and she said, I will do anything you say, ma'am. I hear you 3 need combat training, Tiger said, smiling at his 3 pupils. Is there anyone here with a fighting style? Sato, the buff one, was the only one to raise a hand. Kind of, I never learned a fighting style but I never bothered either, he said. What do you mean by, kind of, then? I can punch stuff. I'm assuming neither of you know any martial arts, he said, looking at Kaminari and Kota. This is going to take some effort, he said, swearing. They shook their heads. You owe me, Lion, he murmured to himself. Her 2 students were the Frog Girl and the Invisible Girl, and she had to admit that this was going to be a lot more fun than camp. Miss, can you see me, Ragdoll? No, but I can sense where you are fairly easily, she said, shaking her head as she glanced at the girl. I'm supposed to teach situational awareness to both of you, Midoriya says. This will be easy then, she said, lifting her arms as the adorable little froggy nodded. I'm very good at spotting things. It was her responsibility to teach Legs, the masked one, and Belly Button how to think creatively. Mask and Legs both wanted to improve their fighting skills against flying targets, but Belly Button was more difficult. She waited until both were ready and cast, then said, Legs, Mask, get ready for a fight. Duel cast. Fairy Army. Today's task is to destroy 100 of the lights that will be circling the arena. She smirked at their astonished expressions and said, next week, we take it up a notch. She snapped her fingers, causing the lights to fly off at full speed. She then called forth dozens of mana-based platforms for them to use, which floated at various heights and hovered up and down. Get going. They started for the closest platform. Young mademoiselle, what is my mission? In French, she replied, did you not read your folder? Oh, you understand me, he whirled around, saying, that's fantastic news. Unfortunately, though, I'm not sure what the class president's notes mean. You're going to use your imagination, she sighed. With a snap of her fingers, a table and chairs materialized, composed entirely of pure mana that could be maintained by a constant flow of the substance. Take a seat. We'll begin with scenarios. The man grinned as he sat down and said, I'm so happy. You run into a villain while in deep cover, she began right away. He has a penchant because he has caused so much destruction, you know. He is going to commit bank robbery. What are you doing? After giving it some thought, he smiled and replied, I call for help and engage. Your call is answered, but as soon as you start talking, he loses his temper and murders a nearby bystander. You're dealing with a death now. Try once more. She noticed his smile waver. Congratulations. The two powerhouses are mine. Lady, during the entrance exam, didn't you get your ass handed to you? Didn't you get your ass handed to you by a zombie that Lion defeated easily? She asked, smiling, forming a cave beneath the noisy one, its roof weak enough to shatter if he stomped his foot. Little explosions began to form at his hands as he snarled at her. Phi, he fell through the ground, ending his challenge. I triumph. She couldn't see him buried beneath the debris when she looked over the hole. Midoriya says you are supposed to teach us control, said the other. He says that you two use massive attacks to try and end the fight instantly, she said, nodding. He wants you both to be able to limit your abilities and have more precise control. It would benefit you both, even though that would typically be a bad thing. When the hole exploded in a boom, the stick of dynamite flew out, ready for battle, and she flicked her fingers up, sending small poles of earth flying at him. She dropped it behind him, creating a thin wall that served only to force him to turn and blast it away while he was distracted and blinding himself. She made a stalagmite and sent it for his back as he fell into her trap. He saw it too late and was about to attack, but she flattened the tip and simply lifted him. Isn't it a Taruki? Nodding, the child said, that's correct. I want you to make a bike. A bike? He asked her, raising an eyebrow. Easier said than done, she grinned. Making each chain link and the braking system will require precise control. If you change gears, you'll receive extra credit. He gave a nod. May I begin? She looked down at him and said, 1 second. She leveled the ground again, and Bakugo was on the floor at his feet, his rage evident on his face. In addition to control, you need to learn how to maximize your sweat control, she said. The gauntlets are useful, but they need a great deal of perspiration to function. If you could achieve the same effect with less, wouldn't that be cool? She smiled viciously. Slowly, he got up and turned to face her, saying, teach me. Let us begin, she said with a smile. Izuku turned to face his classmates, and all three nodded resolutely. The three of you are going to be learning my own fighting style and be going through agility training. Hey, President, Hiroshima held up a hand. Yes. What is the purpose of my agility training? Catch, Hiroshima. Portals of hell. Unprepared for the sudden attack, he hardened himself and stood still. The portals blazed and burned his hardened flesh. He ended the spell before they did too much damage. Reaching out, he healed his injuries and helped him on his feet. You won't always be able to take any hit. Quirks are not always physical assaults. Ashido, Todoroki, and I are the best examples of this. You don't dodge, so if one of us is avoiding your blows, we can take you out pretty quickly. Very harsh example, but I understand you, man, Hiroshima smiled. Let's get started, I'm game. Ojiro and Kendo nodded with him. The following day, Aizawa had contacted him and requested that he arrive early, saying, Midoriya, we found your new classmate. Mister, how did you locate a pupil so fast? She's a Korean student, his teacher sighed. She wasn't enrolled in school yet because she dozed off during several entrance exams, including ours. Yesterday, she completed and passed our recommendation course. Come on in. Observe, someone floated into the office. Name, Mikazuki Tobu. 15 years old, level 6, waking nightmare is a quirk, rank B. 430/430 HP. Mana, 4195 out of 4195. 1325 1325 stamina. STR, 31. Con, 43. Dex, 38. Agi, 46. Int, 209. Wis, 315. Cha, 124. Res, 222. Present state, asleep. Calm and quiet, both awake and asleep. Be afraid of the never-ending nightmare. The girl was floating on a tiny cloud and said, Sir, she's asleep. I'm sorry for the sudden meeting. The papers were only finalized a few hours ago, Aizawa said with a sigh, turning back to Izuku. Miss Kubo, please either wake up or use your quirk. He turned back to face the girl, who was just beginning to awaken, and nodded, saying, It's all right, sir. 2 braided bangs ran down the side of her face, and her purple hair was styled in a straightforward long bob. Her eyes and button-sized nose revealed her Japanese ancestry. Aside from a dab of baby blue lipstick on her thin lips, she didn't wear any makeup. She weighed about 50 kilograms and measured about 150 centimeters. This kind of guessing wasn't his strong suit. She stretched one last time, yawned, and blinked the sleep from her eyes. She landed on her feet after the clouds supporting her poofed out of existence. She smiled at him half asleep, smoothing out her uniform. With a soft voice and fluency in Japanese, she said, Nice to meet you, Midoriya. My name is Kubo. I look forward to working with you. Nice to meet you. He returned to Aizawa. Are you going to introduce her to class at the start or do you want me to handle it beforehand? Aizawa nodded. I'll introduce her during homeroom. I called you early today to show her around the school. You'll be responsible for showing her around and any questions she has. She will also be joining your training class after school today. Sounds fine to me. Can we start? He asked, nodding, and escorted his teacher to their classroom. This is our homeroom. Do you know how Japanese schools work? I have no clue if Korea is any different. She replied, from what I can find on the internet, they're really similar. Good to know. We'll head to the principal's office next. He attempted to strike up a conversation with the girl, but she appeared to be nodding off with each step. Are you okay? She nodded drowsily, then yawned. Yeah. My quirk is stronger when I sleep, so I tend to nap. A lot. Using observe on her yielded no simple answers to the question, what does your quirk do? She grinned. I can bring my dreams into reality, but they can't get more than 20 meters from me. The possibilities of that immediately began to run through his mind. How do you fight? Monsters. I can also create weapons, but I can't really use them. What's the cost of using your quirk? She sighed. Headaches, really bad ones. I also sleep a lot more than a normal person. Mana. Then, her high level of wisdom and intelligence was not surprising. I'd like to spare her. It's my turn. Is that your natural hair color? He asked with a sigh. She yawned again and smiled, adding, no, my mom dyes it when I sleep. The week before I left home was purple week. I think I'm going to sleep now. She collapsed forward, closing her eyes. She moved into the floating position he had seen earlier as a cloud poofed into existence before he could react. Masaki, I'll be honest, kid. I've had enough of attempting to understand you and your classmates. Probably the second most perplexing girl is this one. Tobu, he called, and a small purple acorn creature appeared, perched on her shoulder. I'm sorry for falling asleep. The acorn sat with its head turned forward and nodded, saying, it's okay. Just kind of caught me off guard. Nezu was on his way to his office when they met him. Hello Mr. Nezu, how are you today? He leapt onto his shoulder and responded after spotting the free ride. I've had better months, but things are finally looking up. Who's this? Mr. Nezu, this is Tobu Mikazuki. Tobu, This is our principal, Mr. Nezu. Nice to meet you. The acorn turned to face them. You are a strange creature. Are you sure I didn't dream you? She said after pausing for a moment. Nezu laughed and said, I'm pretty sure I'm real. You're the new student in Class 1A, correct? Izuku arched an eyebrow, but the acorn nodded. After dropping Nezu off at the principal's office, they headed to the lunchroom, saying, I'll be sure to keep an eye on your progress. He led her back to the teacher's office after the brief tour. He gave him a folder and said, Thank you, Midoriya, head to class, also here. He walked to his homeroom and bowed to the two. The folder included some basic training ideas and the girl's known quirk limits. She's a fascinating person. You mean perplexing, he said. That too, but I think it will be fun having her in class. He entered the room, sat down, and tried to come up with a training strategy for her. She is a glass cannon, but it's unlikely that Pixie could impart much knowledge to her. Kendo sat down and he said hello. I hear we got a new student today. Then he nodded and said, she's an interesting one. What's she like? He gave her a smile and shook his head, saying, wait and see. What? Not even a hint, she moaned. Well, He turned back to the front and grinned at her nagging inquiries, saying, good night. Do you have any training ideas? Aki would do well, but she appears to be very good at using her imagination. In this case, neither Mandalay nor Tiger nor Ragdoll would be of much assistance. Either you or someone else would be your best option. How would I instruct her? Teach her to fight like an animal or with weapons. She's probably just lacking technique because her dreams come true. I can't even wield a sword effectively. Very true. A student he had never seen before had rushed into the classroom and left just as quickly. Hey, Ms. Soma says the person who finds her missing doll gets an A for the next assignment. My eyes. Stop talking. That joke isn't funny anymore. She came up with a joke every time he did. Alright, you should ask her, though, it's a good idea. Her cleaver makes her a damned menace. I'll inquire over lunch. Mr. Aizawa entered the room as the bell for class began to ring. We will be welcoming a new student in class today. Please come in. In front of the class, Tobu, who was just waking up, floated in and landed on her feet. She bowed and got back up, smiling as if she were about to go back to sleep. Hello everyone. My name is Tobu Mikazuki. I'm a student from Korea. My family is native, but moved to Korea when I was little. Mr. Nobuo, who teaches here, is my uncle. Miss Tobu's quirk allows her to be conscious while asleep, so if you see her nodding off, please leave her be. If she has any questions, I expect everyone to be courteous. Understood? Yes, sir, was the unanimous response from the class. Miss Tobu, please take the empty seat. He nodded, and she followed suit, moving to the seat beside him. Sorry kid, I have a lot of stuff to do and don't have time for something like that. Are you sure there's nothing I can do to convince you? Izuku, are you starting? We don't beg because we are a god's enemy. All right, she sighed in irritation, I'll assist the girl if you can successfully make my wire and make enough of it. Thank you. Where would I start? He bowed. Go ask Power Loader, I normally use the forge next to his office. He should help you get started. He said, yes ma'am, as he left the office and hurried to the support offices. We may acquire new abilities. Not the priority, but it is a plus. When he knocked on Power Loader's office door, a girl with pink hair and a crazy expression in her eye answered. Who are you? Do you need something? Are you a scout? They seized her and threw her back into the office. He said, sorry about her. She's a little excitable. He concluded by closing the door and leaving the office. How can I help you? Nice to meet you, sir. My name is Midoriya. I know who you are, kid. You were at USJ. He replied, that's correct. I was wondering if you could teach me how to make the wire Ms. Soma uses. He gave him a doubtful glance. Why do you need to know that? I need her help to assist a student in my class. She agreed to help as long as I can make enough of her wire. He burst out laughing. He felt sorry for him and gave an explanation after he had calmed down sufficiently. Ms. Soma is a hard ass and built her wire from scratch when she was still a student. I only know how to make it because she left the notes behind one day. If she's having you make it from my memory, then she's testing both of us. He raised his right bicep and took a pose. I'll teach you to make the highest grade wire in 2 days' time. Sir, I still have class. He dismissed the worry with a wave. He dragged him down the hall to a plain door and flung it open, saying, I'll message Aizawa and tell him the situation. He should be fine with it as long as you are learning. Izuku thought this was a high-quality blacksmith's forge, even though he had never seen one before. I spent most of my hero earnings on this room, and I get to keep it as long as it's open for other people to use. At my discretion, of course. Can't have students like Hatsume digging through here. He began to shiver involuntarily. Follow me. They approached a cabinet and took out a number of metal bars. These are ingots that Soma made. They're made of a combination of tungsten and some form of carbon. I'm still working on how she figured it out, but I'm close. He took out a bucket from a tiny space back there. This is the carbon she uses, but it's unlike anything I've seen. Its quality is top-notch and I've never seen anything like it before. It doesn't act like normal carbon would. Observe. You are not skilled enough to see the description of this item. I'm guessing she won't be happy if we use her existing ingots for this, so we'll start from scratch. How long does this normally take? He began tossing items in a small metal pot and said, it will take a while before the oven heats up enough to melt the tungsten, but it should do it in about an hour. Masaki, message Aki to find out if there's a way to make things more quickly. Thank you. He assisted Power Loader in loading the bucket, which was reportedly known as a crucible, for a few minutes. A. Simply gain one level and tap the item that makes it if you lack the skill required for the task at hand. I. Many thanks. A. Indeed. Power Loader, he asked, glancing at the man who was adjusting a few controls. Yeah kid, do you have a guidebook for blacksmithing I can have? He stood up and entered a back room, saying, maybe. Let me check the storeroom. After a few minutes, he returned and threw him a thick paperback book. A normal person would likely need a magnifying glass to see the text because it was so small and nearly 800 pages long. Take it. It's an old copy of the textbook from like 30 years ago. It's been back there since I started to work here. It won't be missed. Nah, the newer books are much better and easier to understand now, the man said, waving away his worry. Thank you, he said, using observe while glancing down at the book. Creating the Future, written by Kon Daisuke. The fundamental tasks and processes needed to operate a smithy are covered in this book. Would you like to take in this book? When he clicked, yes, the book vanished. New abilities have been added. Click to enlarge. Added skills. Metallurgy level 1. Level 1 metal forging. Level of grinding 1. Level 1. Heat treating. He used his hand to tap the controls, and a brand new interface that he had never seen before emerged. It listed all of the room's machinery on the left. The current project and its timer appeared in the window on the right when he chose the crucible. He could scroll through all the metals and alloys he could create in it beneath both of those. Probably because the materials were in a different room, the list was rather short. A tiny pop-up appeared when he tapped the timer. The timer now reads 55 minutes and 36 seconds. Would you like to expedite the procedure? Please supply an appropriate heat source. Do you think my flames will work? He hummed. Give it a shot. He lit his hand, and it appeared to be accepted by the window. The timer can be set to 0 since you have supplied a more than adequate heat source. The timer will be set to 0 and the cost will be paid after this window closes. Izuku watched with wide eyes as Masaki closed the window and his HP began to steadily decline. He could see the metal fragments melt almost immediately, and the timer on the crucible window also went down quickly. Power Loader cleared his throat and said, how did you do that? I used my fire to heat the metal faster. Well, since that is done, we can move on to the next part, he said, nodding a few times in admiration. Skills have advanced in level. Click on expand. An hour was all that was needed. It turns out that he could shorten the time of all processes by using up all of his stamina and HP. Hatsume had been sent by the ecstatic Power Loader to fetch him something. He put an arm around his shoulder and said, Kid, I got to say, you are by far the most useful person I've ever met. What do you say about becoming my apprentice? Sorry sir, but I want to become a hero. You'd be able to fulfill hundreds of requests in a week by yourself. You would be a hero to heroes, kid. Hey, that's my job, not his. Hatsume was angrily glaring at Power Loader as he stalked up to him after returning with Nezu. I can have more than one apprentice, Hatsume, the teacher said, grinning broadly in response to her glare. In an attempt to attract their attention, Nezu began clapping. May I know why I am here? May I also know what two students are doing here when classes are in session? As per my agreement with the support course teachers, I have 2 days off from class to spend creating my babies, Hatsume said, crossing her arms in response to his query. I see. And you Midoriya, Nezu said, nodding. As he opened his mouth to respond, Power Loader said, I kept him here to teach him a few things. I want this kid as my apprentice. Nezu nodded and grinned slightly, saying, I see, but you do realize that his power extends beyond that of a maker, do you not? Midoriya, please show us an example. He tried to think of something he could do, but his mind went blank. Fire ring, shadow, gravity, and oh, I don't know, Masaki replied to his thoughts. Spear. He employed his quirks and cast the required spells. He noticed Hatsume's eyes brighten and a smile take over her face. Maybe you're right, Power Loader replied with a whistle. What about helping me out every Wednesday? He asked after giving it some thought. Nezu nodded as Izuku turned to face him. Sure, I wouldn't mind. You'd have to double check with Mr. Aizawa though. As if summoned, the weary man emerged from the doorway and said, I have no problem with it as long as your grades stay the same. Power Loader flung his arms in the air. Aizawa, just the man I wanted to see. You sure it's okay? His homeroom instructor nodded. He earns top marks consistently and trains regularly on his own. He's more than welcome to assist you as long as he keeps it up. Now that that's out of the way, I would like to know what spurred your declaration, Power Loader, Nezu said, leaping onto Aizawa's shoulder. The kid finished 2 days worth of work in little over an hour. He's amazing at this, said his new teacher with a smile. Midoriya, Aizawa asked, raising an eyebrow at him. He sighed, I needed to help Ms. Soma do something and I figured out I can use my quirk to make it faster. You mean the quirk that costs you your life to use? His AI gave a snort. He smiled and scratched the back of his head, letting the charms and eccentricities fade. Yes, he asked. Just don't overdo it, you still have your training class after this, his teacher said with a sigh. Yes sir, he bowed, and the principal and teacher left. You ready to go again, kid? Actually sir, I have a question for you. With a toothy smile, the man said, shoot. You're working on the arm for the former member of Class 1A, correct? A grim line took the place of the smile. I am. Do you mind if I help with it? Less than an inch from his face, Hatsume approached him and asked, you think you can improve my babies, do you? She was still openly angry with him. I actually just wanted to add something to it. I didn't want to change it. Pulling her back, Power Loader placed a hand on her shoulder. What did you have in mind? As he carefully etched the first rune into the arm's surface, Power Loader glanced over his shoulder and asked, how often can you do this? These particular runes can only be done once a month. They're extremely strong but time-consuming to make. That's a shame. If they do what you say, it would be a real boon to any hero. Izuku was certain of that. After he achieved level 40 in the skill, the runes were the most recent addition to his repertoire. Rune of Persistent Power gives STR a 10% boost. This rune needs to be drawn flawlessly and can only be used once per month. Failure will occur if the precise posture and depth are altered. Although this rune is permanent, any disruptions to the lines will cause it to cancel. He intended to add a death save, a Gi boost, Dex boost, and weight reduction to the first one. In addition to the death save, each rune increases their stat by 10%, or minus 10% in the case of weight reduction. The Forgiving Reaper's rune. The wearer of this rune will be revived 10 minutes after being killed. Only one drawing of this rune is permitted per year. It had to be flawless, just like the others. When he questioned Aki about why she didn't apply these kinds of runes to herself, he discovered that they required depth in order to function. They couldn't make it last with their bodies. He set down the tools he had borrowed from the teacher after adding the last bit. Time to power it. Observe. Rune of Persistent Power. Mana total stored. 0.2500. He placed his hand on the rune and started to fill it with mana. A minute later, he felt the rune grip his hand and hold it while it drank. Lines of red mana started to spiderweb away from the rune when it reached the halfway point. Not very good for a stealth mission, but we'll make do. How long do you think it will take you to make the others? I can probably finish by the end of the week if I come back every day this week. We planned on delivering it this Sunday, so I'll talk with Aizawa about letting you come here during and a little bit after lunch. After you're done, I'll create a protective barrier for them. Before the rune reached full maturity and the spiderweb began to pulsate with vitality, another minute passed. I hope it pleases him. I'd like something like that if we could lose an arm. That's at least something. After school that day. To be honest, she had never worked herself into a sweat before. She never felt more exhausted than she did now, as her dreams always carried the burden. She had been made to wake up and fight with her own hands by her teacher. If you can't feel the effort you put in, there's no way you'll learn to use weapons. What the hell kind of reasoning was that? She would need to have a serious conversation with the person who made that statement. She repeatedly performed the action, swinging the cleaver at a wooden dummy. Although each swing came from a different perspective, the rhythmic sway was wearing her out even more. Every time she attempted to put her arms down, the insane woman would slap her, even though she was certain that her muscles were putting. "I wanna sleep," she whimpered. Following instruction. "Dang, her place is huge." Kendo pointed to the enormous mansion and said, "I know, right?" She said her family had money, but I was thinking like a 3-story house with a basement, not this. He needed a girl to double-check clothing levels, which was the main reason he had chosen to bring Kendo rather than his other vice representative. He gave the buzzer a tap. Buzz. A man's voice said, "Hello. How may I help you?" "Hi, my name is Midoriya Izuku, I'm here to see my vice representative Momo." It was some time before there was a response. A woman's voice emerged from the speaker as the gate opened. "Please come in." There were many gardens along the road during the lengthy walk to the mansion. The woman who was most qualified to be Momo's mother met them at the Circle Drive. Observe. Name: Kurihara Yaoyorozu, 39 years old. Level: 17. Kendo then bowed with him, saying, "Nice to meet you, Mrs. Yaoyorozu." Izuku looked up at her and said, "Please forget formalities for today. My daughter needs help. She hasn't eaten anything besides the bare minimum and she never leaves her room anymore. I'll do everything in my power to assist her today. Can you take us to her?" With a nod, the anxious mother entered the mansion. Kendo asked the question she had likely been thinking about since the beginning of their journey as they followed. "What exactly do you plan on doing? You never told me." She looked at him anxiously, as if that didn't calm her down. "You'll see. I also promise it's something that won't happen very often or ever unless I need to do it." They went down a corridor and upstairs to a huge door. It resembles a palace. Unknowingly, Kendo mimicked Masaki's yell. "She lives in a castle. This is my daughter's room. I'll be preparing drinks for you all, please give me a minute." Kendo and he bowed and said, "Thank you, ma'am." He pushed Kendo as she slipped around the corner. "Go on." After knocking on the door, she said, Yeah, Momo, it's me Kendo, can I come in? I brought Midoriya here with me, we want to talk." She received no response. She gave him a look. He sighed, "Go in, make sure she's dressed and then let me in." With a nod, she slipped inside. He checked again with Masaki while he waited. "Kid, the memory is right here, so it's okay for the 100th time. I'll even wrap it in a pretty bow as a gift for you. Don't worry about it, everything will work out." "Yeah, you're right," he sighed, and Kendo waved him in as the door opened. Momo was lying on her bed with one lamp on and the curtains closed. She was laying down in the dark. "She won't answer me." He walked around the bed to the girl and nodded. He noticed a tiny flicker of eye movement, but the girl didn't answer when he said, "Momo, I have a proposal for you. If I told you I could take your memory of USJ, would you take the deal?" An expression of desperation filled his partner's eyes. There was only one word: "Please." She glanced down at her bed and nodded slightly, saying, "Then I will help you, but on one condition. You have to take back the memory at a later date. Then please sit up." She kept herself wrapped in a blanket and propped herself up on unsteady arms. Whispering something in her ear, Kendo took her hand and sat down beside her. The question was also directed at Masaki. "Are you ready?" He recognized Momo's nod in his mind. He reached for her head and used his memory transfer quirk, saying, "Here we go. LVL. 1 memory transfer XP, 0.00%. The user can switch specific memories with a target thanks to this ability. To use this ability, physical contact is required. Maximum number of memories, 1. Let it cool for 10 hours. His vision opened a window. It resembled a computer folder with a calendar above it. Assuming he had to choose the date, he tapped the USJ attack date, and memories from that day appeared in the window beneath the calendar. He looked through them until he discovered the exact moment. Oh no! He had to concur with Misaki that the girl could be deadly because they had heard that she had killed a villain, but in what manner? When he chose the memory, that window closed and a new one opened. Please choose a different memory. He was relieved that he didn't have to search after he closed the notification. Misaki had managed to bring the memory to the front of his mind, making it instantly appear on the screen. Although there was a significant alteration, the memory itself was remarkably similar. She shot a sticky bomb at the man instead of killing him with a ball of liquid hell, which allowed her and Shoji to get away in time. The screen vanished as soon as he chose the memory. Little specks of rainbow light began to pour out of their heads and fill the room. After the 1-minute procedure was over, Momo sagged back. Kendo began tapping her out of concern. Kendo nodded and they both tried to move her into a more comfortable position. She's just asleep, let her rest. A minute later, Kurihara was carrying a small platter when they left. Is she okay? Yes ma'am, she is resting right now, but after she wakes up she should be okay, he said with a smile and a nod. Should be, she asked anxiously. I have no way of accounting for how all the memories before and after the event will affect her mind. She has no memory of what she did, so the event itself will not affect her. Her mother nodded. I'll wait for her then. Please feel free to take a bun for the road. I assume you don't need to be walked out. Please tell her we said hi, Kendo said after they both shook their heads. I will tell her to call you, the woman said, nodding. They walked back to the main road after saying their goodbyes. It was a little walk to the station, and since they had some spare time, they stopped for a few drinks. What exactly did you do? I traded a memory I made up in her kill. And since when could you do that? He said with a grin, yesterday. I've been training to you know. I've actually been working on a bunch of stuff after training you guys. Your quirk is such BS, Kendo moaned. He began to chuckle, saying, Pixie says the same thing. After getting their drinks, they walked out of the store. To Jiro's. Actually if you want to rest, I can handle this one on my own. She'll at least answer and move around, so I won't need your protection for this one. She rubbed her neck and said, rest sounds nice. I'm still having phantom pain. Sorry about that, actually, it's quite pleasant, she shrugged. He arched an eyebrow and asked, getting dropped on your head. She threw a bit of hair back and punched his shoulder, saying, no you idiot. I meant being able to fight so brutally. Besides a few of my trainers, everyone I've ever trained with before was too scared to fight me like that. I may be a girl, but I'm a fighter and hero first. He sighed, no problem. I'm sure if I didn't take you seriously you'd hurt me for it. So there was only one option. With a smile, dang straight I would've. They bid each other farewell and boarded different trains a short while later. I have a question, though. I can understand your reasoning and the reasoning behind it, but why would you teach them to fight like you? I'm also teaching them to dodge, you know, he said, closing his eyes as he sat down. The goal is to undermine the foundations of formal education, to instill in them the value of going above and beyond to truly hurt their adversaries. They will need to take the extra precaution to stay alive if what Aizawa and All Might said is accurate. His schedule was significantly altered after he spoke with the two teachers yesterday prior to the first training club. What do you mean? All Might stated, heroes, not the ones you see on TV and newspapers, but the smaller ones, local and small timers. They're disappearing, and we have no idea why or for what, but it is happening. Are there any leads? Aizawa nodded his head. The closest anyone can come up with is that the person doing it is trying to not cause mass panic. He took a breather. Why tell this to me? I'm not complaining about getting new information, but there's not much I can do with this. With a nod, All Might said, this is actually in regards to your after-school training. Additionally, Aizawa stated, we want you to step it up a notch. What do you mean? Why? He asked, raising an eyebrow. Who's ever behind the disappearances took a kid 2 days ago? His thoughts became frantic. She was a member of Isamu Academy. The local police and national police are in high alert. The search for her and the other heroes is ongoing. They haven't had any luck. The mighty said, if this monster is taking kids, that means we have to worry about our own. We want you to step up the training with only one thing in mind. Survival. Aizawa replied, while I would normally prefer to have my student learn this stuff later, it's needed now. They need to learn how to fight to survive and bring down villains. Their preconceived notions of a proper fight need to be destroyed. All he could do was nod. He would need to talk to Aki and the Pussycats. Aizawa distracted him from his thoughts. We also want the training to extend past the sports festival. Obviously we can't expect the Pussycats and the Hales to help past it, but Mr. Khan and I have agreed to joint training with the assistance of the teachers to expand all of your fighting potential. With a nod, Izuku said, I'll alter my original plan. Knock, knock. The woman's voice, muffled, said, 1 minute. Kyoka appeared older as the door opened. Observe. Name. Mika Jiro, 36 years old, level 11. Fortunately, Masaki's whistle was only audible to him. Mama has a game. How may I help you, young man? He raised his head. My name is Midoriya Izuku, I'm the class representative of 1A. I was actually hoping to speak to Kyoka, is she here? Mika just leaned over and gestured with her thumb. He could not understand the words of the loud, angry music that was playing. She's letting off some steam right now. May I, please, be my guest? While I don't have a problem with metal and screamo, it's not my favorite. Izuku entered and was met by someone who said, Observe. Name. Kyotoku Jiro, 40 years old, level 10. With a bow, he said, Nice to meet you, Mr. Jiro. Is this little music note gonna help our daughter? The man asked his wife, who shrugged. Then why did you let a boy into our house? With a smile, Mika said, he said he wanted to talk to her. Boy, you don't plan on asking her out, do you? If you do, tell me now. The man said, spinning around on him. Sweet dropping, he said, and no sir. I just want to try and help her get over this bump in the road, and to get her heart into training again. The song ended with a loud chorus, and another one started right away. As he followed the sound to its origin, he noticed her father wince and said, Then feel free to try and help her, she hasn't been the same since the attack. Her parents then went to the kitchen. There was a pause in the music as he knocked on the door. After a few steps, the door opened. Yeah, she asked, meeting his gaze before slamming the door. That wasn't very nice. I just wanted to talk. Why are you here? She asked without opening the door. I just want to talk. Then talk. May I come in, please? After a minute without a reply, the door finally creaked open. She went deeper into her room and began putting away the instruments, saying, You have 5 minutes. He had some piano skills, and her room was a musician's paradise. While whistling, Izuku said, This place is awesome. I never knew you could play. It's not something I advertise, she shrugged. He took a seat at a chair beside her desk and said, Fair enough. I got a question. What happened at USJ? I've tried asking Ashido, but she won't say anything. Of course she wouldn't, she doesn't want to get blamed for what happened. Kyoka whirled, her eyes blazing with rage. You might be right, but I have no idea what happened. Can you tell me? He nodded, ignoring the anger. As she sat on her bed, the anger seemed to drain from her. The villain that was attacking us made Ashido useless. I was hurt, so we did the only thing we could do, run. We were in the landslide scenario, and as we ran away we found the hydraulics control room for it. She raised her knees to the sky. He noticed tears forming on the corner of her eyes as she said, Ashido melted the beams and forced me to drop it on him. It does sound like it was her fault, so why are you beating yourself up? Because I pulled the trigger, Ashido aimed it, but I finished it. She said gently. I see, he was having trouble coming up with anything. I heard what you did. What do you mean? He asked, looking up at her. You killed enough people to be considered a mass murderer, if you weren't a hero in training. That actually made him a little more angry. Kyoka, she looked up at him and backed away a little. What do you think they were there for? He went on, but she didn't respond. They were there to kill us, our teachers, and All Might. What do you think would have happened if that villain finally cornered you in Ashido? He responded immediately. She attempted to speak, but nothing came out. He would have killed you. There is no doubt in my mind that you saved yourself in Ashido. You can blame Ashido and condemn her to whatever plane of hell you want. What she forced you to do was not right, but you cannot blame yourself for what happened. Are you really going to let that one moment, a moment you had no say over, define your life? Kyoka began to tremble and lowered her head back into her knees. After crying for a few minutes, she eventually looked up at him. Tears were streaming down her face, and what little makeup she had on was badly smudged. How do you live with what you did? He sat down next to her and gazed at his palms open. I don't live with it. I accept it for what it was, a massive pothole in my life, and keep going. I left the pain behind and looked forward to the future. I'm not saying you shouldn't remember the pain, I'm saying you need to use that as fuel to drive you to do better. Can you leave? I need some time to myself. Can you also tell my parents I want to talk to them? She said, ceasing to cry as she dropped back to her knees. He nodded, got up, and left her room. He went to the kitchen and shut the door behind him, saying, I'll see you tomorrow. Her mother's earphone jack was plugged into the wall, and he discovered her parents sobbing and cuddling. Both nodded and said, I assume you heard. Then you know she needs you right now. I'll show myself out. They both gathered him into an embrace and thanked him before he could leave. After a quick embrace, they practically rushed to their daughter's room. After leaving their house, he made the decision to walk back to his own. Do you think Mom is concerned about me? I know she loves you very much, but worried about what happened. Masaki shrugged. I'm not sure. How about asking her? How would I even ask that? Hey Mom, do you care that I killed 4 people and helped kill another 14? You make a valid point. Who are you pairing them with if they attend training tomorrow? I'm thinking Momo can go with Soma. Kyoka can probably go with Tiger. Momo learning how to use weapons and being able to confidently defend herself in melee will help her. Kyoka can probably use her jacks in conjunction with a support item to deliver one hell of an ear-piercing punch. That would be amazing to see, Masaki said with a laugh. When they were on their way home, they fell silent. The following week, he slapped her hand up and deflected a kendo blow. She sent a knee toward his stomach, fighting the urge to make her hand bigger. He blocked it, but as soon as she fell to the ground, he was attacked once more. His knee was struck by a fist that made contact but lacked force. When she expanded her hand, jumped off the ground, and went for his head instead of accepting his kick, he grinned. He punched her in the stomach, deflecting the obvious attack. She shrank her hand and fell into his uppercut instead of blocking. She came back and punched him in the stomach, yanking him forward. It felt as though she was holding his arm in a pair of shackles. So, instead of punching her again, he did the next thing that came to mind. He let her fall face down on his knee. Her grip loosening, he heard a snap and a moan of pain. When she hit the floor, he had to decide what to do. He did injure her quite severely, but the altercation didn't end until she called it quits. Oh well, he kicked her in the stomach, but she caught his foot and spun around as a result of the momentum. She kicked his foot, and it made contact, causing him to do the splits. One of the guys observing made a noise that he heard. He slammed his legs together, aiming for her head with his unnatural flexibility. She literally kicked him after taking the kick head on. Once more, it was pointed at his head. I believe she is genuinely trying to harm you. He leaned back, lifted her into the air, and slammed her into the ground instead of launching the attack. She lost her hold as a result of the attack, and he gained enough momentum to stand. She coughed up some blood and tapped the floor, saying, "Call emergency aid." As he assisted her in standing, he observed her appearance. She had a huge bruise on her forehead and a broken nose. She performed admirably. She was correct. Their altercation had lasted roughly 10 minutes and consisted solely of a close-quarters brawl. I'm sure she would beat you if you let her use her quirk to attack. He was certain that he would be covered in bruises if he could. However, her broken nose was the most severe injury. She returned his smile with, "Not bad, I say you pass." After pumping her fist into the air, she aimed it directly at his stomach. She extended her hand and hit him even though he moved out of range. He was laid out. She entered his line of sight, and he was there for a few seconds. Her nose was healing, but the blood was still there. If you ever, and I mean ever, drop me on my face again, I will find a way to harm you. Got it, she said. Got it. With a strained laugh, he gestured placatingly. Got it. She gave him the finger and went to sit with Kirishima and Ojiro. He got up and approached them. They had all been able to pick up the fundamentals of his style and apply them to their own. Kendo was the most vicious with it of all of them. He was certain that she would crack skulls if she used her quirk in a fight right now. From today forward, I'll allow you to use your quirk when we fight to get the hang of it. Each of them grinned. Though that does mean I get to use my quirk too. Nothing too big, just enough to pack more of a punch. Their grins faded. We're done for today though. You can work anything you want. I'll heal you if you decide to practice though. When they chose to practice, they frequently engaged in three-way sparring. Almost always, one of them broke a bone at the end. He turned to face Ojiro and said, Actually Midoriya, we were wondering. We were wondering if you would fight all three of us. Absolutely. He could feel Masaki's excitement rising. He smiled at them and began to strike. A go was never the beginning of a real fight. Pillars of Hell. After dodging, all three launched an offensive. How are you all doing, girls? Pinky was panting heavily and appeared on the verge of passing out. There was a gasp for each word. How much longer? She paused and took out her phone to see what time it was. 5 more minutes. We then begin a different workout. With a grimace, Ashido continued. How are you? The inquiry was directed at Uraraka. She complained that, every muscle in my legs hurt and feel like they're ready to fall off. Despite this, she didn't seem to be giving up. For them, this week was Hell Week. They started with squats every other day before progressing to push-ups. She made them perform aerobics if they could stand and move after that. However, she did the exercise with them because she wasn't a cruel person. They got to dance, so every day in between workouts was more enjoyable. Until the final hour of non-stop dancing, Pinky, who was a natural dancer, was having a great time. The other took a while to pick up, but it began to improve. It's time to push up. Both girls collapsed onto the ground, sprawled on their backs. I'll show you a photo that Izuku sent me by mistake a while ago if you get moving. He began to think of the guys section when he borrowed my quirk and we began discussing our home's natural hot springs. He went by a mirror. Despite having a very deep red face, the girl was on her hands and performing push-ups. I adore this girl. She began performing push-ups alongside her. A minute later, Pinky joined. He had been training them to fight without any peculiarities and putting them through their paces. He intended to make them so innately combative that they could engage in combat while blinded or furious. The big one had taken to boxing like it was second nature, and he had to admit that it was going well. The child had been a threat when he lost his temper, the only time he had let them use their peculiarities in combat. Shaki was learning Kai blocking and gradually integrating it into his combat style. He had to admit after fighting with the child yesterday that he would be terrifying if given a few more months. Unfortunately, he was unable to spend more time with him. Kota's stances were becoming more fluid with practice, but he was still struggling to get used to real combat. With her blocky, easily telegraphed movements, Kyoka was gradually learning Muay Thai. As he said, "Gather around, kittens." The four paused and took seats beside him in a small circle. "It's time we move on to the next stage of your training," they said, looking at one another anxiously, which made him smile. He flexed his arms and shouted into the air, "We're going to begin speed weight training." Then, Sparky held up his hand and said, "Sir." "Yes. What is speed weight training?" "I'm glad you asked," he said, turning to face the girl seated at a nearby table. "Little miss, can you open it?" she asked, snapping her fingers without even turning or acknowledging. 5 weighted vests dropped out of one of her portals that opened above them. While waiting for them, he put on his own and tapped his foot. "Take the one with your name on it. It has been weighted to your body and your current strength level. After that we start running through the obstacle course," he said. Lion, the girl, and they created the obstacle course. When Lion finished in 10 seconds, it turned into a race instead of the intended speed and dodge training. Naturally, there were some restrictions. You couldn't fly over it or ruin the entire path in front of you. That prevented the majority of the children from falling below 60, but some came very close. With a cheer, she exclaimed, "Go get 'em." As her girls began fighting, she was quite pleased with their current state of development. They should be able to avoid almost every attack from a single individual in another 3 weeks. She was asked to teach them her fighting style by Izuku, but it wasn't actually a fighting style. She had been practicing against skilled fighters Tiger, Pixie, and Mandalay, and she had only one option: dodge. She had developed the ability to sense people's movements over the past few years, before even they were aware of what they were doing. Very practical, but challenging to use. They wouldn't be able to use it in a full-fledged battle right away, but that would happen eventually. To give Asui a chance, Hagakure wore gloves and a long-sleeved shirt at her request. Avoiding her clothed attacker, Asui was a shadow. The majority of the time, a hit did land, but she never stopped trying to avoid it and remained alert. When Froggy was able to avoid an attack and strike out on her own, the battle changed. After taking the initial blow, Invisagirl went on the defensive and began to bob and weave. She found watching them fight to be a lot of fun. They would resemble two dancers if they received additional combat training. At the moment, it resembled a brawl between two inexperienced children. They would attempt to punch but miss, and when they did, their blows lacked force. Boom! She threw herself aside as she felt something flying directly at her, and she saw both of her students avoid the rock but land on their butts. Angrily, she glanced at the dynamite walking stick. Pixie, get a hold of him. She looked down at the paper and asked, how's it going? It was difficult to teach Mr. King of Murder because he was prone to putting all of his energy into a single attack. Aizawa came up with the idea for the paper, and the child's task was to spread it evenly with as little perspiration as possible. The purpose of the paper was to show him his progress rather than merely inform him that he was improving. The child was quiet and paying close attention, so it appeared to be working. She left him to his work since he didn't respond. She approached the man known as Icy Hot and observed him at work. Although it was crude, he made steady progress. She gave him a shoulder tap and said, let's talk. He stood up and nodded. I heard about the fight at USJ. If you don't mind me asking, how did you create the mirrors at the end? He glanced at his right hand. I created a long chunk of ice and forced it to split. After they were the right size, I buried them in the ground. It was easier since they were such large objects in plane. This type of control was not something I ever thought of trying. She tilted her head and hummed. He simply stood there, awaiting an answer. As he watched her, she felt a drop of perspiration slide down her cheek. Was there ever a time when this child had little to no power? She stomped her foot and made a little pile of balls the size of a head, saying, maybe the bike was too big of a step. Let's try this. She gave him one with a much easier assignment. This ball is hollow. I want you to fill it with ice. It has to be done without cracking or breaking it. If you destroy it, no problem. If you think you've done it, let me know. We'll break it open and check your progress. He glanced down at it and used his magic, instantly encasing the ball. He picked up another, but the outcome was the same. Try sitting down and closing your eyes. Focus and control your ice with your mind, not your eyes. He sat in the lotus position after nodding. She watched from a chair as the ball was wrapped and launched into the air at, shit. The walking dynamite was struck in the head by the ball. She claimed to have heard the gears in his head turn and everything stop moving. As he gazed at Todoroki, tiny explosions were exploding all over his body. With a raised hand, the child said, sorry. Bakugo screamed, icy hot, and slammed the now empty spot at him. Pixie, get a hold of him. With a sigh, she closed her eyes. Phew. There's a woman lying in an alley, you just heard her scream. The alley is empty besides her unconscious form and a dumpster. There is no other exit or entrance. What do you do? He was silent for a moment. Fire a shot aimed for the dumpster and pull her to safety. Keeping my eyes on the rooftop the whole time. Mana stone, she moved her hand, and Aoyama ducked under the tiny stone. You pulled the woman to safety, she has no obvious injuries. What now? He clenched his teeth. Call for assistance and check the alleyway. If I see anything, defend myself and the woman. The phrase, you get attacked from the rooftop, the villain is using a sword, was dodged once more. More quickly than the others, he responded, grab the woman and fire a shot at the ground, in an attempt to gain distance. You successfully dodged the attack, but he's gaining on you, said another stone that was dodged. Brief glance at my surroundings. You see a bus bench a little distance down the street. Its sides are mirrors. Fire 2 shots, one to the left, aiming for the mirror to come back at me. The other is aimed at his right side. This time she touched his ear. He dodges the shot aimed for him and jumps in front of the return shot. He stumbles forward, but keeps coming for you. Fire at the ground to keep gaining distance. This time, no pebble. You ready for the next part? She asked, smiling as she leaned on her hands and said, good job. You finally passed. He swallowed. No, too bad. She opened a portal beneath his chair and dropped him into a world constructed entirely of mana. It had taken her nearly 3 days of non-stop meditation to create it, but the benefits it would give outweighed the cost. He wouldn't, and couldn't get hurt during the scenarios, but he'd have to relive them until she pulled him back out. She looked at glasses and mask jumping around in the small rock wall area she had Pixie make for them. The small lights were sitting at the top, seemingly taunting them. She waited and watched each of them. Iida was foregoing staying in a single place and was jumping off the handholds side to side. He's like a goat. Shoji was trying to go with the same principle. It was actually fun watching them. Soma sighed, "Come on. Stand up and fight." The girl let out a whine and stayed on the floor. "If you don't get up, I'm increasing your daily repetitions." She let out another whine and was thrown up to her feet by two shadowy arms. Yaoyorozu held her swords at the ready and waited. The tired girl put up her hands and materialized two cleavers. The taller of the two was by far the more experienced, and had a near-perfect win rate. "Alright, start from the top, but make it faster." Their fight was about the same pace as before, but Whiny was slowly down again. It ended when she was punched in the nose and laid out again. How the hell did she even pass the test? She asked, feeling the vein pulse in her forehead. Her quirk, Puppet Master, didn't stop her from exercising even as a child. The child was most likely extremely lazy and didn't try anything. "Get up." "But I hurt," she whined again, obnoxious. "How?" "Wah?" the girl asked, opening an eye and glancing at her. The girl's face darkened as she slowly got to her feet, saying, "Get up and go, I'm tired of wasting my time with you. You don't deserve to be here if you're not going to try." The cleaver in her hand drew back as she leapt forward without hesitation. She withdrew her own cleaver and stopped a neck-slash attempt. Daydream. Lizards and snakes appeared out of nowhere and began attacking her from all sides. Knives flew out from where they were hiding under her dress and attacked the creatures, saying, "Cutting board." Leaping back, the girl slashed forward with an empty hand. She connected with the two dolls nearby and used their bodies as a shield, following her gut. The girl threw herself and the dolls backwards when she slammed into them. She untangled the dolls into their smaller forms, skidded to a stop, and assessed the situation. The other trainers had halted their lessons to observe, and Yaoyorozu had backed off, looking concerned. Strobing light and a thick mist filled the girl's sphere of influence. From the bubble, she could just make out a faint whisper. "Sleepwalk." After a few seconds of silence, the bubble burst into sound. Growls, chirps, and howls were all audible to her. The land she left behind was destroyed as the girl started to move forward slowly. The orb's mist appeared to solidify and take the shape of a face. "You don't know me, but you'll know my nightmare." She had to yank herself to the side to barely avoid the bubble as it flew forward. "Chef's cutting board," she yelled, and all of her knives shot forward into the bubble, accompanied by loud chirps and whines. Before the bubble cleared of mist, she briefly worried that she had hurt the girl. Blood gushed from the girl's eyes and mouth as she was hung on a cross. Her eyes widened as she heard one of the pupils throw up. As she charged forward, her instinct for combat gave way to reasonable concern. She was caught and thrown into the air after taking a single step into the bubble. She was being held by the ankle by a blood-based creature who started to laugh in a deep, raspy voice. She made a connection to her knives and dolls and said, "Okay. I'm done with this." Her attack was successful. She sent the knives for the girl. The creature turned to face the assault, which gave her the crucial moment she needed to escape. 3 of her dolls shattered into wire as they flew forward into the creature. The final one flew in the direction of the girl. The demon dropped her after exploding in a razor wire explosion. However, that did little to slow it down as it thickened and reformed in front of the knives. The knives struck, slowed to a crawl, then came to a complete halt. Keeping the sharp edge on the outside, her 4th doll exploded into the wire. Funeral march of a marionette, she thought, closing her fist. The wire cocooned the demon and the girl and pulled taut. The girl wasn't finished, but the demon left. She was struggling against her grip, but not enough to cause her any problems. She gave the order for her other wire dolls to encircle her. "Just go to bed." After a minute and a few easily subdued beasts, the girl reached her breaking point and became motionless. She unwrapped the girl and lowered her to the floor. A cloud arose beneath her as soon as she was free, lifting her and gradually beginning to envelop her like a blanket. "Stupid brat." Putting an arm around her, Pixie said, "Ah, admit you like her, Soma." Her former instructor smiled broadly, but she didn't smile back. The girl refuses to put in work to get stronger. The only reason she could put up a fight right now was because she went berserk. There was no thought in the fight. "Do you give up?" She closed her eyes and sighed, saying, "No, but she needs more training than what I can give her." Even a week later, she's barely improved her body physically. Pixie murmured, "Tell Aizawa. I'm sure he and All Might can work on it." She exhaled and picked up the cloud-wrapped girl. "I'll take her to the nurse's office. Can you tell Yaoyorozu to train with Izuku for the next hour?" Pixie said with a nod, "Sure thing."
I will continue the story in next part. Till then, bye bye.